22. Something given and taken. Author's note: I'm sorry this chapter took so long. It's entirely my fault for getting busy with the holidays, but there it is. Also, my laptop is dead, and I'm having to write on my smartphone until I can replace it. It's very hard to type 30K plus words on a palm-sized touch keypad. Trust me. However, the Google Docs app is a lifesaver. The wonderful artwork for this story was done by Dalfiana. Look her up on DeviantArt to see the whole picture and her other great works. On my profile is a link to the forum, which contains a detailed guide to Harry's runes and other story notes. Many thanks to JDH41 and GJ Mega for baiting this chapter. Hugs men's curiosity, searches past and future, and clings to that dimension. But to apprehend the point of intersection of the timeless with time is an occupation for the saint. No occupation either, but something given and taken in a lifetime's death in love, ardor and selflessness and self-surrender. T. S. Eliot, the newspaper article came 1 week later, accompanied by letters from his friends and Headmaster Dumbledore. The headline was in bold, followed by a sensational article that spent more time speculating about Harry's next move than it did summarizing the man's grand accomplishments. Nicholas Flamel dies at age 665. Harry turned the letters over, unopened, and raising his hand burned the newspaper with curling wisps of phoenix flame until nothing was left but a single picture of the aged philosopher as he had been when Harry first met him. A middle-aged looking man with curling dark reddish-brown hair and a wide smile. With finality, he reached up and took the picture, his magic swirling forward to surround it in clear glass, the burnt edges charcoal black as the man waved slightly towards the camera, eyes alight with wisdom and humor. He placed the picture on his mantle, propped up by a single glass stem, and turned his back on the fireplace to step into his phoenix flame, appearing high in the sky over the hot Egyptian landscape. He fell, tumbling in the air, and his steel wings rose from his back to hold him aloft in the sky. Fire burned below in the alchemist's center, a tribute to a man that was now gone, and crowds were gathered to hold vigil, a wordless echo of mourning rising up to the sky in the Egyptian way, of the loss of a life that had brought so much light to wizards of all nationalities. Harry closed his eyes and brought on his transformation forcefully, his voice rising in pain as bone twisted and cracked, feathers piercing skin and bursting forth with a spray of scarlet, his wings and arms merging together as if sewn with a hot needle and threads of fire. His human voice turned to warbling phoenix song, and his magic became a large force that seemed to hold him aloft. He saw faces turning to look up in awe, heard the change in the voices from sadness to amazement, and he sang with his new voice, a tune that started light, rising and falling like the quick steps of his teacher, full of light and life. Then his voice deepened to sadness, to the thick sorrow of loss with the quiver of fear he could not repress. He thought of the man bowed down with age, his calm acceptance and serene eyes. He paused in his song, his fire rising around him like the tail of a comet, and when he sang again, it was of the hope that all held within themselves, that this was not really the end, but the beginning of something new. When he finished, he saw that there were more phoenixes, ranging from light yellow and orange to dark red circling around him, their own fires an accompaniment to his own deep scarlet. He stopped, green eyes meeting their dark ones, wondering at their acceptance of him, knowing they knew he was not like themselves. Brother of light, they whispered to him with fire and song, and then they turned, spreading out in every direction much like a starburst of light, leaving Harry alone in the middle. With a last glance below at the silent crowd of wizards surrounding the center, he allowed his flames to rise up and swallow him again, and for a long while he flew in white flame with no destination, peaceful and quiet and warm. When he awoke as if from a sleep, he was laying upon the stone altar of the temple in Heliopolis, his mind clear and his spirit renewed. Arabic Alif, Arabic Lam, Arabic Tain, Arabic Noon, Arabic Half, Arabic Alif, Arabic Hamza, Arabic Alif, Arabic Het, Arabic Ta, Arabic Fa, Arabic Alif, Arabic Lam, Arabic Het, Arabic Yet, Arabic Alif, Arabic Tet Mabut, Arabic Wow, Arabic Meme, Arabic Wow, Arabic Ta, Arabic Noon, Arabic Yet, Arabic Kaf, Arabic Wow, Arabic Lam, Arabic Alif, Arabic Sin, Arabic Fa, Arabic Lam, Arabic Alif, Arabic Meme, Arabic Yet, Arabic Lam, Arabic fa, Arabic yet, Arabic tain, Arabic rot, Arabic dad. Arabic hain, Arabic yet, Arabic rot, Arabic meme, Arabic scene, Arabic ba, Arabic wow, Arabic half, Arabic tet mabuta, Arabic meme, Arabic noon, Arabic halif, Arabic lam, Arabic hamzatat alif, Arabic hain, Arabic halif, Arabic noon, Arabic yet, Arabic wow, Arabic halif, Arabic lam, Arabic ket, Arabic fa, Arabic yet, Arabic fa, Arabic tet mabuta. The letters from his friends urged him to return to Hogwarts, if only to visit. The headmaster informed him that he would be required to pass examinations to conclude his third-year material, which could take place at any time. He would, however, be required to either enroll for his fourth year at Hogwarts or find another tutor, as ministry law required. He could not bear the thought. After Flamel, who could possibly compare? Who could understand his magic? Instead, Harry wrote back some simple platitudes that he was taking some time to decide his next move, and informed the headmaster that he would take exams within the month. In the meantime, he explored the vast wealth of knowledge contained in the alchemist's trunk. You shouldn't have done it, Draco. He looked up coolly, meeting Blaze's gaze straight on. The boy leaned against the door to their room, arms crossed across his chest. Draco sneered. Well, I did. Get over it. He turned away, looking down at his notes. He heard Blaze leave and slowly released his clenched fist. Perhaps he had been too rough on the little Gryffindor, but the boy's skulking demeanor offended him. How could he simply walk about unmolested after taking that photo of Harry? He had made all the Slytherins look bad, especially himself. Could they let an insult like that pass? He had begun to wonder that they would, and so had taken matters into his own hands. So what if the boy hadn't shown up for any meals in the last few days? He was probably moping about in a classroom somewhere until he got his courage back. He was a Gryffindor, after all. In no time at all, he would be back to his old tricks, snapping pictures of everyone and everything in the most obtuse and rude manner. Satisfied with his logic, Draco turned back to his homework. He dipped his quill into the bottle of ink, then elegantly began to write across the page. 7 ways to approach an unknown dark creature. Without Flamel's constant tutoring, life for Harry slowed down almost unbearably. He was used to constant action, to study and practice. After a few days reading, even the notes could not hold him for long, his body longing to exercise and his wings aching to stretch. With a last look at his parchments, he abruptly stood and left his room, entering the kitchen and calling to Ivy. The house elf appeared, large ears flopping slightly as her round eyes looked up at him. Yes, Master Harry, sir. He looked about before speaking. Please, fix me a large basket of lunch, enough for 4 boys. The elf smiled in delight, disappearing with a snap of her fingers. Harry heard fervent motion in the pantry and left to enter the living room with a sigh. After a few minutes, basket in hand, he set off to Condon, Australia. Care was outside nailing a wooden shutter that must have fallen. Harry frowned, glancing around, and guessed there must have been a bad storm. Care looked up and noticed him, a large smile growing on his face. Harry, we were beginning to worry. He gave a half-hearted smile, which he could tell Care noticed, though the man did not press. Harry cleared his throat, speaking. I've brought dinner. I'm guessing it's about that time here, right? Care brushed off his hands on his jeans and glanced at a watch on his forearm. That was new and looked expensive. Care saw his gaze and flushed slightly. It was a gift, from my boss's daughter at the carpentry shop in town. Harry gave a sly grin and Care laughed, shaking his head and gesturing him inside. Mike was sitting at the small desk, writing something, but Tiny was nowhere to be found. Harry frowned. Where's Tiny? Mike looked up, smiling. School. Oh, Harry replied at a loss. He had forgotten all about that normal kids were in school this time of day. He set the basket on the table as Mike hugged him in welcome. How are you, Harry? Harry glanced back at Care, who had rinsed his hands and was leaning against the doorframe. He sighed, knowing they would want answers for his odd absence. Guys, well, I was being tutored this year by a wizard. They nodded, glancing at each other. His name was Nicholas Flamel. He was a famous alchemist. Mike's eyes narrowed, and Harry saw the moment it clicked. Was. Harry nodded slowly, looking down. He was still sad, and still felt the loss, but it was no longer overwhelming. Care walked over and sat beside him, pulling out sandwiches and crisps from the basket. What do you plan to do now? Just like that, matter of fact. They did not treat him like a child, did not press to know his feelings, and Harry was grateful for it. He looked up, glancing at the 2 men. Well, I'm done with this school year. Just need to take end-of-year exams. I was thinking of returning to Hogwarts, visiting my friends and using the library there. There are a few things I would like to research. Care nodded slowly, beginning to eat, but Mike was not satisfied. And next year, Harry frowned, looking down at his clasped hands, forcing himself to relax. I don't know. Mike looked displeased, his brow furrowed, but Care made a subtle motion and the boy dropped it. Harry sought for a safer topic. Mike, have you found a job yet? Care chuckled, and Mike grumbled under his breath. Yeah, with a local farmer. Care's eyes were bright with mirth. Tell him what you are doing with the local farmer. Mike glared at Care, then sniffed in scorn. Mr. Macmillan says that any good employee must start from the bottom and work his way up. Care dissolved into laughter, and Harry began to smile. Mike's mouth twisted, and reluctant humor grew on his face. Which I found means I'm to start by mucking the dairy stalls and dream of one day feeding the cows instead. Harry laughed, and Mike began to chuckle as well, shaking his head. Hermione walked by herself down to Hogsmeade that day, carefully moving through the deep snow. She was meeting Neville and Blaise at the Three Broomsticks for some much-needed downtime. Things had only gotten more tense in the school, the constant presence of the Dementors putting everyone on edge, even the teachers. Tempers were fragile, and what Hermione's cat had done to Ron's rat was considered bad form for any pet. Ron had submitted a complaint to Professor McGonagall to make her send Crookshanks home, and Hermione was afraid the boy would get his wish. She looked down with a sigh, entering the town and heading over to the inn. When she entered, she saw Blaise sitting by himself over in a corner by the stairs to the upper rooms. Hermione walked over, sliding in across from him. Why couldn't Draco come again? Blaise rolled his eyes, absently sipping from a large mug of butterbeer. He got a bad grade on his transfiguration essay and is doing extra credit. Hermione rolled her eyes. I told him that the third principle is transmuting and not transmorphing. Still, I wouldn't call an acceptable a horrible grade. Blaise smirked, leaning back in his seat. Since when has a Malfoy ever been satisfied with being merely acceptable? Hermione laughed, but eyed the boy's dark expression. Something else was going on, and she was determined to figure out what. Blaise caught her gaze and narrowed his eyes. Keep staring and I'll think you're in love with me. Hermione refused to be baited, squaring her shoulders and gripping her mug. What is going on between you and Draco? Blaise stiffened, and for once he looked away first. When the silence continued to grow, Hermione pushed. I'm not blind. You two find multiple ways to avoid each other lately. You are running out of excuses. She watched his face carefully and saw no hint of an expression pass his face. She ground her teeth in frustration. Boys were so stubborn, she huffed. Just tell me already. Blaise leaned back, eyes hooded. Fine. She sat up, surprised. Blaise continued, still looked down at the table, fingers absently tracing the grain of the wood. Do you know Colin Creevey? She startled, eyes widening. No, not really. He's a year below me, quiet. Always has that camera of his, even in class. Not sure how he gets away with that. Blaise casually spoke. He took the picture of Harry. Hermione slowly nodded. Yes, he did. Blaise's finger stopped, and she raised her gaze to meet the Slytherin sitting across from her. Draco followed him a few days ago, broke his camera. The boy was devastated. Hermione's hand rose to her throat. What? How could he? It was just a photo, and that camera was everything to Colin. He didn't deserve that. Blaise remained expressionless. Didn't he? Hermione scowled. Of course not. That's like killing a pet or something. No wonder you are mad at him. Blaise rose a single eyebrow in surprise. That's not why I am mad at him. Hermione stopped in mid-rant, shocked. What, but? Then why? Blaise leaned forward, his hands taunted his side. Because Draco did not even consider that it was Harry's right to seek revenge, not ours. And you know as well as I do that Harry would not approve of Draco's methods. He also did not even implement the least bit of subtlety, attacking him in the middle of a corridor, rash and brazen. It was the action of a Gryffindor, not a Slytherin. We are supposed to be the knife in the shadows, not the bolt of bloody lightning. Hermione snapped her mouth shut, realizing with a flush that she had been gaping. She hummed deep in her throat, uncertain how to reply. They were wrong, the both of them. Colin had just taken a stupid picture. What was wrong with that? And if she knew Harry, he wasn't even the least bit bothered by it. She frowned, about to speak, but suddenly Blaise's eyes narrowed in thought, looking behind her. Hermione twisted, turning about to see an odd sight. 3 professors entering the cheerily lit inn, and 3 that were not normally together. Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sinistra. Odd. She turned back around to see Blaise twisting out of his seat with a gleam in his eye. Hermione frowned, reaching out to snag his sleeve. "We are not spying on the teachers again," Blaise chuckled darkly, shrugging her off. "A Slytherin always needs to keep informed, my dear, and this meeting looks most informative." Hermione groaned, then with a glance around, followed him. The boy's wand tip lit up as he cast 2 spells in succession, ones Hermione had gotten familiar with herself in the last few months as she sought to pass unnoticed more and more often. Tacitus Vestigia, Quiet Flant. Hermione sighed, applying the same spells to herself, to muffle the sound of her footsteps and cover the sound of breathing. She grumbled in a low tone as she slunk behind him after the teachers, cautiously ascending the stairs to their left. Things said in private are meant to stay private. Blaise looked back with a twist of his lips, dark brown eyes gleaming. Honestly, Hermione, if they really didn't want to be heard, they would put up an intruder charm, or at least a silencio. Now, be quiet. Hermione huffed, but stopped nagging the boy. She might feel guilt about spying, but she had a curiosity streak a mile wide, plus she also did not want to get caught. And he had a point. Surely the professors would put up some sort of spell. Or did they think no one would bother to listen in on a simple get-together? They paused outside the door the teachers had retreated inside, and Blaise settled beside the left side of the door, Hermione taking up a stance on the right side. Voices sounded in greeting, and she abruptly realized that 2 more professors were already inside Hagrid, who had started teaching care of magical creatures, and Madam Hooch. For a few minutes the teachers talked of bland things, and just as Hermione was starting to get bored with the eavesdropping, a sudden comment brought her to attention. "I tell you, Minerva, it's downright suspicious. Severus hates Remus, we all know that, but he's always sneaking off to the man's office. Suspicious." It was Professor Sinistra. Hermione looked over at Blaise, who waggled his eyebrows in an obscene way. Hermione rolled her eyes. She had her own suspicions about their defense professor, especially considering his odd way of falling ill the same week every month. She leaned closer, straining to hear. "Albus has not seen fit to inform me what the informal meetings are about, but it is easy to guess. Sirius Black." Blaise's eyes gleamed in excitement. Hagrid began to speak, his voice slightly slurred. "At least Awry is not here." There was a rustle inside, low tones of agreement, and then Flitwick spoke up with inquiry. "I thought they had determined that Black is not after Mr. Potter." Professor McGonagall spoke up, her voice grim. "It was not his safety that Hagrid was speaking of. It's our fears that Mr. Potter will seek out Black instead." Sinistra, this time, was questioning. Hermione froze, her ears straining. "Whatever for?" "The poor lad has enough on his plate without running off after Death Eaters. I imagine he has had quite enough of dueling already, if what I've heard is correct." Professor McGonagall's voice was low, and Hermione strained to hear the response, her heart beating fast. Blaise mirrored her motion. "I forget that you were not here in those days. Sirius Black was James Potter's best friend, as was Remus Lupin and another boy, Peter Pettigrew." There was a gasp inside, as if the last name was more important than the fact that the murderer was a friend of Harry's dad. Beside her, Blaise jerked, his eyes wide. She looked over inquiringly, but he shook his head, leaning forward again. Hermione waited. McGonagall continued, her voice now dark with anger. "It was said that Black was the one to lead the Dark Lord to the Potter's house in Godric's Hollow. After the murders, their friend Peter confronted him in Muggle London, and the rest is, as they say, history." "Oh, the poor lad, I see." Sinistra sighed, and the conversation then moved on to brighter topics. A nudge on her hand brought her gaze around to Blaise, who was motioning her away. They went down the steps, and Hermione started when Blaise turned around, his wand pointing at her chest. For a moment she was startled, almost expecting an attack. "Finite incantatum." Hermione relaxed, avoiding Blaise's narrowed eyes before the boy turned to deactivate the spells on himself. For a moment they stood there before Blaise shook his head. "You are mighty keyed up, Hermione." She shrugged, looking down. "You would be too if half your house thinks you are a murdering traitor, or at least friends with one." Blaise grunted in acknowledgement of her point, then led the way back to their table. Hermione sat, feeling slightly numb. Finally, she looked up at Blaise, who was absently sipping his now cold drink. Do you think Harry knows about Black and his parents? The Slytherin turned to her, face blank. No, Hermione nodded, looking around the busy room as she spoke. Should we tell him? Her eyes met Blaise's, and the boy now had an almost feral gleam in his eyes. Absolutely. Neville never showed, and they returned to the castle to find the Gryffindor in detention. Apparently, a prank had caused him to trip and spill a bottle of ink all over a stack of notes that Professor Snape had been carrying while he walked down the hallway. Needless to say, the potions professor had not been happy. They quickly set a time to meet after dinner and parted ways. Once alone in their classroom, Hermione quickly told the two that had not been present what they had heard. Draco immediately agreed with Blaise that Harry should be told. Neville finally nodded, though there was a hint of sadness and anger in his expression. Hermione was the only one who was not sure, afraid they would put Harry in danger by causing him to return. For the one thing they all agreed on was that once Harry knew of this, he would be back in Hogwarts, if only for a chance to catch the monster who betrayed his family. You've said we want him back. Well, here is one way to do so. Draco offered, his grey eyes narrowed at her reluctance. Neville cleared his throat, his earnest expression gentle. Hermione, he deserves to know. Wouldn't you want to know if it was your parents? Hermione was abruptly reminded of Neville's own circumstances and flushed. With a sigh, she brought out a length of parchment, and with a last glance around, began to write. Erica Floserturn considered herself a most practical witch. She had practical parents, practical grades, and a practical job she was very content to go to. How she found herself in this sterile room was terribly impractical, however. There she had been, minding her own business, thank you very much, enjoying the night air of a rare, cloudless London evening, and the next thing she had known she was waking up here, wandless. About 3 hours ago, she suspected. She cast her eyes about once more, before they snagged on something that made her heart race. Her wand. It was lying, as if forgotten, on the floor beside a door that she had already deemed locked. Practical witch she was, she immediately raced over to the thing and cradled the priceless piece of wood. Her wand, 9 inches of rowan with a single strand of unicorn hair. A good practical swishy wand, if she did say so herself. Had she somehow missed the thing? She glanced about, sniffed, and with a quickly whispered Alohomora, opened the solid wooden door and exited. She glanced about, sparing a disparaging thought about the silly muggles who must have taken her here. Was this a hospital, perhaps? Muggles were so strange. She walked down the hall, wary of meeting anyone. As if the thought had summoned them, 2 men in strange dress, most plain and unpractical, came around a corner. She halted, watching them. Muggles, the men frowned at her. Miss, we must insist you return to your room at once. Erica paused, before straightening and doing what she must. She would not be held against her will by ignorant, magicless people. I will most certainly not. I am leaving immediately. The men shared glances before walking forward purposefully. She gritted her teeth and then sighed, raising her wand. Surely the ministry would consider this to be self-defense, Petrificus Totalis. The man on the left stiffened, eyes wide, and fell backwards, stiff as a board. The other man shouted and began to run, eyes angry. She almost grinned at the simplicity of it. Honestly, to think they could stop a witch with magic on her mind. With casual practicality, she swished her wand again, with a lazily spoken word. Immobulus. Ah, variety. She observed the man fall to the ground and sniffed again. She tidily stepped around the men and raised her wand. Point me exit. Her wand spun on her palm before point down the hallway to the left. With a solemn nod to the air, she continued on. 3 more encounters later, she was beyond the excitement of cursing idle muggles and going into board. How many were there, honestly? They were like rats, squirming about these sparse holes. She frowned and cursed her inability to apparate. It was why she always walked home, after all, and she had never liked getting her robe dirty in the flue. Suddenly, a noise behind her. She whirled and saw 4 men, eyes casually resting on her. She paused and turned to see another 2 coming behind. She narrowed her eyes and raised her wand. A sudden voice spoke in front of her. A small brown-haired man, eyes a bright green that could be called handsome. He had an exasperated look on his face. Honestly, James, enough toying with her. She obviously isn't going to use any advanced spells. He was speaking to a tall young man with slicked black hair and wire-rimmed glasses. The man, James, sighed in return, his grey eyes flickering over her in regret. I guess you are right, Nathan. Come on. He turned to look at one of the burly men beside him and barely spared her another glance as he spoke. Take care of her. Erica, the practical witch she was, raised her voice in immediate indignation. Now just wait a moment here. Who do you muggles think you are? Vermin, kidnapping me. Why you? She drifted off, suddenly woozy. She turned to her left side numbly, seeing a small metallic object sticking from her hip. She pricked it free without a wince of pain, the small barbed tip barely having pricked her skin. Another wave of exhaustion came over her, and she found her wand slipping from her limp fingers. She tried to speak, but the world suddenly spun, and Erica, ever practical, sat on the floor just as she was pulled into blackness. James looked over the footage again, watching the witch easily open locked doors and incapacitate his men. They were all well paid for their silence and forbearance, and he made sure they knew it. They had learned through trial and error that such spells often dissipated once the magical user was rendered unconscious, but other times could take up to a day to fade away. In this instance, all had awoken as soon as the subject was asleep. He turned away to his assistant, Nathan, whose green eyes were on a sheet of notes in his hands. Idly, James questioned. Anything new? Nathan looked up with one raised eyebrow before sighing. I'm afraid not. It seems most of the ones we get are simply office drones, paper pushers of a sort. Useless. The few that showed promise merely vanished from their rooms, apparition it is called. We need to find a way to prevent this, but besides keeping them drugged, which makes them useless, we have found no way yet. We need a wizard. James grunted in agreement, looking at the screens once more. One of their first confirmed observations had been that witches and wizards, without exceptions, were extremely weak without their precious wands. Most, once reunited, disappeared. Some, like the plump Erica, tried escape in another fashion. He sighed. I'm afraid our wizard is without a doubt angry with me. Nathan sighed, fingering the paper in his hand. You know, we have one more card we can play. I'm sure the boy would agree. James was silent for a moment, his grey eyes unreadable. Finally he spoke, tone grim. I do not think blackmail is the best method. We need to win him over to our side instead. I need more than a single favor. I need many. The brown-haired man looked down, his voice low. Perhaps, then, he would be willing to speak to Harry to tell him about our mission. James turned, pacing across the room. They split ways in a bad time, and I doubt Harry would agree with our methods. Capturing innocent witches and wizards, experiments. No, the boy would explode on us again, and probably burn the building down around our ears in a childish fit. No, there has to be another way. Nathan was silent a moment before he spoke again, his tone grim. You know, it is only a matter of time. It only takes a spark to light a fire, as they say. James paused, and once more turned to the screens lining the wall. Dozens of them, each locked on a separate cell within the building, almost all occupied. Quietly he spoke. Yes. He reached out, tapping a screen with a sideways smile. And a spark we will have. The letter fell from Harry's numb fingers. He sat, his heart beginning to pound heavily in his chest. Sirius Black. He had read enough of the newspaper articles to know why the man was wanted by the ministry. He had killed 12 muggles and one wizard in a bloody demonstration of a blasting curse, all the day after Voldemort was acknowledged to be defeated. A known follower, the papers had said, very dangerous, upset at his master's downfall, acting out in anger and revenge. His eyes fell to the letter resting on the floor, and he heard a soft croon as Fawkes landed nearby. Absently, he turned to the bird, speaking aloud. Get me Dread, please. He saw the bird vanish into fire and closed his eyes, seeking calmness. What the papers had not known about the man was that the wizard he had killed was one of his parents' best friends, a Peter Pettigrew. And they had most certainly not spoken of Black's connection to himself, that he had been the very one to reveal his parents' hiding place. A hiss brought his eyes open to see the green and red serpent idly landing beside him as Fawkes took a place on his shoulder. Harry spoke, his voice distant. What do serpents do when another snake smashes the eggs of a nesting place? Perhaps not the words he had wanted to use, how to deal with a traitor to one's family, but the idea he supposed was the same. Dread let out a long hiss, rising up on a long coil of feather and scale to observe him. They bite the egg crusher with poison. It was a simple statement. Harry nodded slowly, thinking of the other name listed, Remus Lupin, another friend, and one currently teaching at Hogwarts. All connected, perhaps, and Dumbledore probably attempting to catch the wizard by using the school as was an old game of his after all. But what or who was the bait? Harry grimaced, gritting his teeth as he pulled back his sleeve. Giving great fear in troubled times, we leave here. Come inside. His sibilant hiss easily navigated the long, formal name, each tone soft in an almost chant. The Quetzalcoatl did not hesitate to sink fangs into his arm, and Harry did not flinch, instead turning away from the dissolving form to look at Fawkes. We return his magic said for him, and Fawkes trilled in answer, not really a word but a feeling. Joy Harry stood, tossing on a plain black robe over his silk grey shirt. He pulled out his family trunk, easily smearing his bloody arm over the clasp and opening it wide. He raised his hand, speaking. Pack. His magic immediately seemed to spread in every direction, grasping books and papers and clothing, neatly stacking them in the appropriate compartments. When finished, he pulled his magic tightly inside himself, more than he had done in months now. He would not want to walk the halls of Hogwarts with it spreading loosely about him, making students flinch and look around in confusion. They might not know what it was with their youth, but the teachers would, and he did not think they needed to know just how much stronger he had become in the last year. He had enough rumors spreading about him and his abilities as it was. Hogwarts would instead be a test of his control, his restraint with his wandless abilities. Could he pretend to be an average wizard? He left the room pulling his trunk, leaving it in the kitchen while he called all the elves together. Ivy stood tall and matronly, looking him over with kind eyes as Blossom smiled shyly. Darby stood to attention, taking his role of personal elf to Harry Potter seriously. His pillowcase had been cleaned and now bore the Potter crest, something he was sure Ivy was responsible for. He ignored the show of ownership, speaking in a final tone. I am leaving for Hogwarts immediately. Ivy, Blossom, you have both been the epitome of helpfulness. I am sure it will be continued if ever I need stay here again. The two elves bowed happily, the younger almost levitating in joy at the compliment. He had no doubt that both would keep the house in order, but knew that if there was anything elves enjoyed, it was being told how well they were doing, and even better, being given a task they already wished to accomplish. He turned to Darby. Darby, if you will, please take my trunk to my summer room at Hogwarts. If you are not averse, I will take you with me. Darby bowed several times in succession, his ears wobbling in glee. Yes, Master Harry, sir. Darby will be most happy to accompany Master to Hogwarts, sir. Harry nodded, felt his anger rising, and tamped it down. He yearned to seek out Sirius Black, desired to trap the wizard, and find out every detail he could of the man's relationship with his parents, but it would have to wait. First, he would need to speak to the headmaster, and then his friends. With a last glance around, Harry called to Fawkes, speaking aloud. Take me to the headmaster's office. It will look better if you did so than I. Fawkes swooped down, and Harry experienced the odd sensation of being led through the flames instead of traveling them himself, the flames more gentle than his own, soft and bright. In an instant it seemed they were there, and Harry was looking into the surprised blue eyes of Albus Dumbledore. He sat, eyeing the older man, his white beard long and trailing down the front of his sapphire blue robes. The headmaster smiled, gesturing towards a seat. Harry, my boy, it is a pleasant surprise to see you. Come to take your exams. Harry frowned, idly wondering how to start the conversation. Finally, he nodded, carefully looking around the room and smiling hesitantly. Yes, sir. I rather thought I would stay at the school for a while, visit with my friends, stay in the summer room near the library. Dumbledore looked surprised again, but hid it faster. I see. Are you certain? I'm afraid I would have to insist you still follow curfew rules with the situation here. You might be more comfortable staying at your own apartment at present. Harry allowed his face to frown again, while inside his mind raced. So they still were not positive that he himself was not the intended target of Sirius Black. Perhaps they had entertained the thought he himself had, that Neville or Hermione in Gryffindor had been the target, in order to draw him out of hiding. He would have thought they would have abandoned that notion as too complicated for an escaped prisoner, many assumed to be insane from prolonged exposure to the guards, the Dementors of Azkaban. Yet another unpleasant thing, he supposed, and he could feel the cold sting to the air that had to be from their presence. Harry realized the silence had gone on too long and spoke. I'm willing to obey curfew, of course, though I see no reason to attend classes after I test out of them. I rather hope to do private study in the library. I am researching wards at present. The headmaster smiled congenially, but Harry could see the worry growing underneath. Surely Professor Dumbledore would not refuse. Harry felt his eyes narrow and purposefully looked away to hide his annoyance. The elderly wizard spoke, his tone reluctant. Very well, Mr. Potter. Of course we would be happy for you to return to this fine institution. Perhaps you would, however, like to attend some of the elective classes, ancient runes or divination. Harry snorted, inwardly relieved at the man's agreement for him to stay, but insulted by the suggestions. I doubt I would learn more in an introductory course to ancient runes than I have in the last few months under Nicholas Flamel's tutelage, and divination is a load of crock. The twinkle in Albus Dumbledore's eyes faded into seriousness. Perhaps next year, then. However, I would not so lightly exclude divination. It has its place. There was a warning there, one he could not fathom. Before he could comment on it, the headmaster continued. I will inform the staff of your arrival. Classes are underway as we speak, but dinner will be in the Great Hall at 6, as it has always been. Curfew, however, has been moved from 9 to 7, directly after supper. Harry nodded and stood. He paused as the headmaster spoke again. Even though you are not currently enrolled, you will still be expected to obey the rules. Harry paused, speaking lightly. And punishment. The twinkle came back into the blue eyes. No points, of course, but I'm sure the teachers can be most creative in detentions. Harry nodded with a sideways smile and saw Fawkes settling on his perch in the corner of the office. His glance was followed by the headmaster, who smiled. It will be good to have Fawkes back with me. I have missed his company. Harry nodded, a smile coming on his own face. I am grateful you have not minded his absence. He is a good companion. The headmaster nodded in agreement, then waved him off with a last comment. I expect you will be tested this Saturday. The teachers will contact you. Harry nodded and exited, stepping down the stairs with a light tread. It was Wednesday, which meant he would have to wait 3 days to test out of third year. He was sure the end-of-year test required by the ministry would be the same for tutored students as it was for those that attended school, but also knew that no emphasis was put on them until the 2 big tests, the OWLS and the NEWT. Those were recorded by the ministry and could affect future class options as well as job offerings. Harry walked absently down the hall, ignoring the few students on their free periods who gawked at his presence. He was sure the rumors would be ahead of him by dinner time, and the whole school would know he was back. With a sigh, he resigned himself to that inevitability. He wasn't sure how exactly to expect to be treated after the horrible events of his second year, but knew it would not be with the same hostility. He had slain the basilisk, after all. Surely any suspicion of him being the heir had perished along with the snake, and with it, too, the fervent hatred of the students. Perhaps he could instead be met with indifference. That was something much easier to handle. He paused, pulling out his wand and placing it in the center of his hand. Point me, Hermione Granger. The wand spun, paused. Harry followed its direction, mind-making and discarding various plans. He would find his friends, fill them in on what he knew. Then he would begin his hunt. Hermione exited defense, still elated over her perfect casting of ridiculous. Neville and Blaise fell in beside her, Draco walking slightly ahead with a haughty look. All of them had accurately cast the charm to hold off the boggart, and were proud of it, though most of the class had also done so. Still, it was an accomplishment. They could all point to their practice with the Patronus charm as the key to their success. Even though none of them had gotten more than a thin mist, they had had plenty of practice thinking happy thoughts. Hermione suddenly noticed Draco slowing his pace and peeked around him. Her heart sank. The corridor ahead was blocked. Ron Weasley stood, arms crossed, with a defiant smile on his face. He was flanked by his usual friends, Dean and Seamus, but what made her hesitate was the presence of several older years, and not all of them Gryffindors. She saw her friends tense, and Blaise muttered under his breath. So, the little lion has finally gotten his pride together. Hermione bit her lip at the mental image and leaned over in his direction. What does that make us? Gazelle, she whispered back. Blaise glanced at her sideways, his lips turning upwards slightly. Of course not. We're most definitely hyenas. Give me your best laugh. He smiled wide, showing off his perfect white teeth. Hermione found herself grinning, and as they came to a stop, she could see her grin being misinterpreted by those in front as scorn. Her smile faded, and weariness rose up to replace the momentary humor. She was sick and tired of this idiotic harassment. What did the fool want to accomplish? He couldn't do real harm, not with the teachers always about and witnesses in the hallways. He would be expelled. Then she saw the pleased look on his face and realized that the red head was getting exactly what he wanted, which was to make her and her friends miserable. Her fists clenched. Quietly, she spoke as the other three waited wary. "We need to beat him, don't we? Beat him so hard he won't ever attack us again." Surprised glances came her way at the violent comment, faded into respectful looks from Blaise and Draco. Blaise spoke again, his eyes turning back to the posse in front, who were shifting nervously while watching their ringleader. "It's the only way to get rid of a bully." Neville cleared his throat, his fingers white around the wand in his hand. "What do you suggest, then?" For a minute they waited, then Draco murmured, amusement light in his voice. "There are only 4 of us, and 7 of them. Those upper years can take us down, I think. But before they do, we can severely damage one certain Gryffindor. I think it's worth it." They all exchanged a glance of agreement, then Blaise spoke calmly, as if this was another of their mock duels in their study room. "All right. Draco, Hermione, you two hit Ron with the worst spells you can think of. Neville, be prepared with your strongest shield. I'll try to take down the other 2 third years. That will leave us with the 4 older students. Then try and help shield, but we need to scatter apart. I'll take the right with Draco, you take the left with Neville. 1 shield, 1 attacking." It was a good plan. It was impossible to both shield and fire at the same time, but with the 4 of them they could do well enough taking turns if need be. Still, the odds were not in their favor, but they knew that already. They weren't in this to win, but to show the arrogant bully that even with superior number on his side, he would still get hurt, and grievously. He would not be spared, and they would not be scared. Hermione faced forward, waiting. Their whispered conversation had not taken longer than 2 minutes, but the others were shifting more now, and Ron had still not spoken or acted. Behind them, Hermione saw other classmates from their previous defense class backing up, their faces a mix of dismay and curiosity. No help found there, she mused, and grit her teeth. Finally, Draco spoke, his voice calm and bored. "Well, what are you waiting for, an invitation?" Ron Weasley smirked, glancing to the sides, and the others drew their wands as one. They must have practiced that, Hermione though, and withheld a sigh. The gesture was dramatic, but only looked silly on the students. Blaise chuckled. Ron saw his amusement, and his eyes narrowed. The Gryffindor spoke solemnly, looking them over first, then glancing at their audience. Face bold though red was rising up his neck from under his collar, and his voice trembled slightly with anger. "You 4 are friends with a murderer, Harry Potter, and as such do not belong here in Hogwarts. We believe all 4 of you should be taken out to the Dementors, just like Sirius Black." His tone was formal, as if he had rehearsed the words. Hermione felt a seed of fear grow in her stomach at the mention of the darkly clothed spectres, and her heart lurched. She saw Neville stiffen further, and Blaise's brow was furrowed in concentration. This put a new spin on things. None of them wanted to be spelled unconscious and dragged outside, to suffer in the presence of the soul-sucking creatures. Surely the teachers would prevent that. Surely another student would inform them of what was happening. But the next period would have started already, and the chances of them being caught quickly were slim. If they thought to make their bodies invisible, the dread grew inside her, and she bit her lip. Ron laughed as if he could see their fear, his eyes triumphant, and behind him the other fidgeted slightly as if in discomfort. She couldn't blame them. Ron sounded half-crazed, his eyes wild now. The red head raised his wand, and Hermione braced herself, calling to mind a spell. Beside her, Blaise began to count down softly, and she ignored the words the Gryffindor was spouting. 3, 2, 1. Incarcerus, Blaise cried, his spell catching Dean in the side and flinging him to the ground. As one, Hermione and Draco spoke. Densageo, Fervasir. Hermione watched with wide eyes and saw with horror the 2 upper years both raise shields that glimmered silver in the light, the 2 spells that should have caused both debilitating boils and painful teeth flinging to the side. Ron's smile grew, and he twirled his wand. "You didn't think I would just leave myself open, did you?" With an absent wave of his wand and a whispered word, he released Dean from the spell, and the boy sat up with a grunt. Ron smiled even larger. How long do you think you can hold up a shield against 7 of us shooting against you? Hermione felt her heart clench, but she resolutely raised her wand, followed by the others. Ron grinned and spoke. Now. Hermione quickly spoke the words for the shield she was now so familiar with, hearing the others speaking as well. Pratigo. How long indeed, she cursed to herself. Waves of multicolored jinxes rained down on them in splashes of vibrant color, and she felt it like a punch forcing her down. She looked over at Blaze, her face strained. Any ideas? She shouted to be heard over the bangs and whistles of flying spells. The dark-skinned boy grimaced, and Draco growled under his breath. Hermione felt herself beginning to sweat, and cursed the fact that Ron, while an idiot, was also apparently quite clever. Another spell hit her shield hard, shattering it, and she quickly raised it up again before the next spells could strike. Then, suddenly, the barrage stopped. Breathing heavily, she looked up, her gasp bringing the attention of the others around. At first she thought it must have been a teacher or perhaps an older student. A glimmering shield like she had never seen before was warped in front of them, and there stood Harry Potter, but one who had grown another few inches since she had seen him at Christmas, his face lined with stress and anger. He wore a simple plain black robe, and his messy hair spilled down to his shoulders in black strands. The impossibility of him being there made her wonder if she had indeed been knocked unconscious and was dreaming, soon to wake in the presence of the Dementors. She pinched herself hard and winced. Beside her, Draco drawled, his voice tinged with a slightly malicious edge. What took you so long? Green Eyes looked back at them wary, before his lips twitched in acknowledgement. Then he turned back to face ahead and lowered his hand, the shield vanishing. Hermione realized Harry's wand was nowhere to be seen and groaned to herself in realization. Surely Harry hadn't been gone too long to not remember to hide his abilities. As if in answer, she saw his other hand raise up with wand in hand. She relaxed slowly, her teeth clenched in anxiety. Ron was staring with wide eyes, a shocked look on his face that quickly turned to glee. He called out in a babyish voice that grated on her nerves. Potter, so you've finally come back. Did your friends tattle on us? Tell you what big meanies we have been. Draco grumbled under his breath, but Blaze was grinning. At first, Hermione didn't notice what was so funny, but then she saw. The students beside and behind the Gryffindor were exchanging troubled looks, subtly backing away as if to distance themselves from the source of an explosion. Ron must have noticed as well, because his features twisted. Don't be afraid of this fool. He deserves everything he gets. More glances, and Ron began to redden, knuckles tight around his wand. We are in this together. We agreed. Hermione waited for them to leave, but the students seemed to have gathered courage and stood firm. Harry finally spoke, and his tone sparked sympathy inside of her. It seemed angry, but with an underlying weariness, as if he too was sick and tired of posturing students. She shared a glance with the others as she listened. You have absolutely no chance against me. With one shield, I have taken the hits from all 7 of you and did not feel the strain. Leave, before I need test your own defensive capabilities. Ron flushed at the admonition, but the words seemed to go right over his thick head as he stubbornly refused to move. The others, too, seemed to have resigned themselves to going down with the ship, and Hermione could almost hear Harry grind his teeth. Very well. Harry raised his wand, and Ron did as well, echoed by his companions. Should we attack, too? Neville's voice worriedly called. Draco snorted, speaking back. Let him take them. They deserve a demonstration. Did they? Hermione wondered, and saw the shields spring up, defiant, some warping the air, others casting a silvery glow, all strong and untested. Harry seemed to gather himself, and Hermione saw the air around him swirling slightly, as if something moved there, and she squinted, but it was gone in the next moment, and a single word was spoken. Finite incantatum. For a second she gaped in astonishment. Finite incantatum. That was his response. A first-year spell, meant to undo enchantments and wake up petrified classmates. Finite incantatum. Even as the thoughts raced through her mind, she saw the results of the 2 words, saw the shields as one wink out. The Gryffindors gaped in astonishment as great as her own that it had actually worked. Hermione had never heard of that spell being used in such a manner. She watched as the Gryffindor's mouth moved silently before he raised his wand again, his shield coming up. Slowly the others followed, though she could see the fear growing on their faces, the sideways looks, the furtive eyes. Again Harry spoke slowly, casually. Finite incantatum. Again the shields winked out. Without waiting to argue, the two of the older students turned and quickly walked away, and Ron called out in anger. Get back here. It's just a trick. It has to be. When they didn't answer, Ron turned back, eyes almost glowing in anger. He rose his wand and began spewing off curses, again and again, trembling. Casually, Harry waved his wand to the side, the curses following like metal to a magnet, spun and tossed aside. She had heard of such a technique, used among auras for minor spells, but it was supposed to be advanced and require an extreme amount of control over one's own magic. Control, she supposed, Harry most definitely had. The other two older students left without a backwards glance, and Seamus, looking apologetic, followed. Dean put a hand on Ron's shoulder, and the redhead began to shout. Fight me! Bloody fight me! Damn you, fight me! No! He shouted the last at Dean, throwing off the boy's grip and stepping forward. His next curses were exceedingly violent, expulso, confringo, obtundo. Still Harry batted them aside, causing them to land with bangs and shattered stone against the walls. The students behind them backed up further, eyes wide with awe and fear. A harsh sound brought her eyes back around to the griffin door, and she suddenly realized that Ron was sobbing, the spells coming to a stuttering halt. Ron whispered with a watery glare, his brown eyes full of hatred. You killed my sister, you bloody bastard. Harry's face was blank, showing no response to the statement. Dean reached out, grasping Ron by the shoulders gingerly as if afraid the boy would shatter at his touch. The boy allowed himself to be led away, and for a moment Hermione stood there, feeling as if she was somehow intruding on a private scene. Any joy at watching the boy so shamed had faded with the tears, and she found herself embarrassed instead. Neville spoke, his voice soft. Harry, are you all right? Hermione started in surprise, wondering what Neville had seen that she had not. Harry still stood, his shoulders loose, as if he had only returned from a short walk out of doors. Then she saw that his wand hand had dropped to his side, and an almost unnoticeable tremor was causing the wand to tremble. Harry turned, his green eyes dull. When he spoke, he was still calm, his iron will keeping the emotion out of his voice. No, I am not. He looked them over, and Hermione finally wrenched herself into action, tentatively reaching out to grasp his hand, slipping her own into a gentle clasp. Come on, let's go somewhere private. She glared at the others as she turned away, stepping through the mass of wary onlookers, and Neville immediately began to lead the way as she tugged Harry along beside her, filling the air with idle chatter about the new defense teacher, the new first years, and the recent exploits of Peeves. Through it all Harry walked, silent, and Hermione thought fervently of what she could say to lessen the cold finality of Ronald Weasley's words. Could we have done that? Neville asked when they arrived at a classroom different from the one Harry remembering them using before, one that had been cleared of desk and held only 4 chairs. Harry took one, Hermione hovering behind him like a mother hen over her chicks. He turned to Neville, speaking. Which part? Neville flushed, shrugging. Well, the shield part, but both, I guess. Harry looked blankly at the wall, finding it hard to think after the wrench his heart had taken at Ron's last words. You killed my sister. Inside him, dread twisted, his hissing voice angry. Why such self-pity? It is not like a snake to regret. No, it isn't, Harry supposed. Animals did not regret. Dread grumbled at the insult, but a cough brought his eyes up to see Neville waiting for his answer. Not allowing himself to blush at being caught daydreaming, Harry replied. Perhaps, with time and skill. Finite incantatum only requires that your own magic be stronger than the enchantment you are attempting to remove. It is simple. Draco scoffed, his voice hard. Sure, simple, except you removed all the shields at once. Hermione frowned beside him. What do you mean? Draco raised an eyebrow at Harry, his grey eyes cold. Only that our dear Harry here only cast finite once, effectively showing that his own power was greater than the combined power present in every shield he dispersed. All 7 of them. Harry frowned, but could not disagree with the statement. It was, at face value, true. What the Slytherin could not know was that Harry had not intended to dissolve them all. It had simply happened. He had been pleasantly surprised at the result, and not seen fit to complain or draw attention to his surprise. Let his enemies think him strong, and thus think twice about attacking himself or his friends again. Neville cleared his throat, breaking the strong glares going back and forth between Hermione and Draco. "And the maneuver you did with your wand," Harry spoke, eyeing his friends. "It's a nonverbal form of declino, accompanied by specific maneuvers of wand and hand. Auras are taught it in training, but most teachers learn the technique as well. It's good for using against feisty students, I was told." Harry fondly remembered the lesson from Flamel, and was surprised when it was not accompanied by a twinge of grief. He was glad none of them asked about the first shield he had used, the one that stopped the spells being cast by the entire group, behind Ron Weasley. He wasn't sure if now was a good time to explain his runes or the power of Heth. He hadn't thought to use his wand in his anger at the scene, and had caught Hermione's quick, concerned glance. He pushed that thought from his mind and looked over at his friends with a shrug. Neville nodded, glanced at the others, then back at him, finally breaking into the subject that was on their minds. "Why did you come back?" Harry sighed, knowing that all four of them were watching him carefully. "I got your letter." Hermione glared fiercely at Draco, leading him to assume it had not been her idea to break the news to him of Black's involvement in his parents' death. Blaze's head tilted, and he spoke. "Will you be in classes now with us?" Harry shook his head, sitting upright in his chair. "No, I will take the final exams for third year this Saturday. I'm staying in the summer room granted to me as well." Draco's face twisted. "Not going to slum it with the rest of us in the dorms. Not grand enough." "Shut it." Hermione hissed, but Harry waved her off, meeting the grey eyes straight on. "Why are you angry, Draco? If anyone should be, it's me. You were the one who ignored me second year." The blonde looked at him angrily, eyes flashing. "You know why I did that, and it's because you just left us here with no word and expect an apology to be enough. And then you waltz back in here and expect us to take you back." Neville was shaking his head quickly in denial of Draco's words. "That's not the way I feel." Harry held up his hand, cutting the Gryffindor off, meeting the accusation straight on. "I did not come back because I was not ready to. I still don't know if I'm ready. I did kill someone down in the chamber, and I am responsible for Ginevra Weasley's death, however indirectly. I was offered a tutorship and took it gladly. I will not feel bad about that. I did feel bad about not informing you personally of my decisions, and I apologized. Yes, I expect it to be taken in the spirit it was given, just as I have forgiven you for the way you acted as well. I also hope that we can all be friends again like we were." "Of course we can, Harry," Hermione burst out, almost trembling with feeling. Neville nodded. Blaze spoke as Draco looked away in silence. "We can still be friends, Harry, but you must know it will never be the same. We have all changed. We are all growing up. We aren't just kids anymore." Harry nodded and looked away, out a small window fit into the right wall, watching clouds scroll past leisurely. "I know it won't be the same. I hope it can be better." Blaze nodded, but his face was shadowed. Draco finally spoke into the silence, turning to face Harry again. "I'm willing to learn from you and with you. However, my family comes first, as it always has." The statement went deeper than the simple, obvious meaning. By family, Harry could guess, he meant his father, and his father followed the Dark Lord. Was that Draco's plan as well? Harry did not allow the blonde to get away with the statement, speaking the true question. "Draco, are you planning to join the Dark Lord?" Hermione gasped, and Draco momentarily lost his composure, eyes widening. Harry refused to play the political game, refused to be subtle. He spoke again, voice firm. "Draco, are you planning on allowing the Dark Lord to harm and possibly murder Hermione and her parents?" Now Hermione was pale, but Harry did not turn to her. Instead, he met Draco's gaze without flinching and saw the boy look down first. "Harry, it's not like—" "No," he spoke sternly. He stood, pacing angrily, speaking in words that fell like stones to the ground. "It is simple. The Dark Lord wishes the annihilation of Muggles and their children, including the enslavement and possible death of Muggle-borns and half-bloods. He would set up a society based on power, wealth, and brute force. Is that what you desire?" Draco was pale now, his pupils dilated and his throat bobbing as he swallowed. Finally, he whispered a single word, looking down. "No." Harry turned to him, stopping. "No." The blonde looked up, suddenly angry. "No, I said it, all right. No, I don't want that. I don't think I ever did want that, not slaughter, not torture. But things can't stay the same," he shouted forcefully. Harry nodded. "No, they cannot." Draco looked nonplussed, glancing at the others. He asked in confusion, What do you mean? Harry turned away from his friends, looking out the window again at the bright world spread out below. You are right, things cannot stay the same. It's a messed up system, blatantly corrupt, and too easily overcome. No, things must change. I just do not know how. Draco sat again, as if in amazement that Harry was agreeing with him. The Slytherin cleared his throat. So, what are you planning to do? Harry turned back and studied them. When he spoke, his voice was cold with anger. First, I'm going to find Sirius Black. When Harry Potter entered the great hall at the side of Hermione Granger, it seemed as if a strong wind had blown all words away. Silence reigned, all eyes focused on the black-haired boy as he regally walked towards the Ravenclaw table. Without a word or hesitation, he sat in the empty spot the Ravenclaws had reluctantly made for Hermione and Neville. More space was made when Harry sat, and if he happened to meet anyone's gaze, they rapidly looked down and away. The whispers gradually started as he began to eat silently, a soft, muffled noise, soon joined by Neville on his other side. He tried not to pay attention to the words, but focused on his lunch. A sudden chipper voice made him glance up. Luna Lovegood was sitting across from him, cheerfully eating a slice of salted ham, her silvery eyes lit up from within. From each ear hung a miniature green radish, edged purple at each tip. Hi, Harry. Nice to see you again. Harry felt the eyes around him focus harder on him, ears straining to hear his answer. Quietly he swallowed and spoke softly. Hello, Luna. How have you been? Luna smiled vaguely, idly glancing around with a shrug. Oh, wonderful, I suppose. There had been a dreadful infestation of gilded finches lately. I think they took my shoes 3 days ago. The buckles are shiny, you see, and they are like ravens in that kind of way. Harry nodded solemnly, but his green eyes were hard as they met several of the girls sitting around him. I see. Well, if you have any more problems with them, perhaps I can help. Of course, Harry. Luna replied simply, grasping her silver fork and spearing another slice of ham. Harry continued to eat, noticing how silent the hall still was. Apparently he had struck many of the students dumb with his unannounced presence. What were they waiting for? Him to announce his plan, make a speech. With a mental grumble, he pushed his plate away and stood abruptly, avoiding his friend's eyes as he left the hall at the same pace he had entered it, each step falling loudly on the stone. When he stepped outside the door, the noise level abruptly rose, as everyone spoke at once. He grimaced and shook his head as he began to walk away towards his room. Who knows what the Hogwarts rumour mill would be spinning out as fact before supper time? On the second level of the Ministry of Magic, pandemonium reigned. It had been bad enough when Black had managed to escape the inescapable prison, and even worse when Dementors and Auras were posted at Hogwarts. But now, with the 11th acknowledged reported disappearance of a ministry employee, things were reaching ahead. The Auras hadn't seen such activity since the war, and that knowledge shone from behind many fearful eyes. For Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Aura office, the situation was delicate. Besides the 11 missing wizards and witches, there had been reports of at least a dozen more attempted abductions, if it could be called that. Being knocked unconscious, waking up in a strange Spartan room, and then apparating to safety when one's wand mysteriously appears in the room. Each story corroborated those details at least. Each had been on their way to work. His eyes ran over the pages spread out in front of him across his wide wooden desk. All ministry employees, all intending to use the telephone box entrance. What was the motive? And could he assume, based on his files, that those missing had not possessed the ability to apparate, and therefore escape? None had possessed permits. So those abducted were being held, for some purpose he could not fathom. There did not seem to be any connection between the victims other than their employer and their lack of permits. Those who reported the incidents all did have apparition permits. He hummed deep in his throat with frustration. This was not the typical pattern of Death Eater activity, no matter what the pompous minister had spouted out at a conference held that very morning over the odd occurrences and missing persons. There was something he was missing here, some pattern he could not see. Rufus leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. Ministry employees missing. Some abducted, but escaped. Perhaps the perpetrators were after information. But why not put up anti-apparition wards? Why not administer potions? Or if it was Death Eaters, why not simply use Imperius? No. He tapped a long tanned finger against his stack of paper before standing to pace with a limping gait. It was not Death Eaters, he was certain. Politics prevented him from following that angle, and he faced too much pressure from the upper levels of the ministry to give the case too much attention whilst Sirius Black was still at large. Still, there was something here, something worth more time than an overworked junior aura would give it. He turned, reaching out absently to grasp a piece of paper and scrawl a quick note, before spelling it off in the shape of a simple paper plane. As many had before it, this piece would find its way to the man Rufus trusted with such matters. Someone who could investigate quietly, with much more discretion than he himself was capable of in his position. And if necessary, they would plant an agent to explore the situation, to walk as bait the streets of London. For now, the London Street entrance would be temporarily out of order, and portkeys given to those workers who lacked the means to floor or apparate. Until this was solved, they could not risk the media getting a hold of the facts of the situation as more disappearances took place. A knock at the door brought his attention up, and Rufus smiled as his eyes met the familiar ones coming through the door. Shacklebolt, I need to talk to you, Draco, alone. Hermione spoke firmly, snagging the blonde by the sleeve as he was about to pass her in the hallway. Beside him, two of the girls in his house peered coldly at her, one with long blonde hair and vibrant blue eyes, the other with dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She ignored them, meeting Draco's narrowed eyes. Colin, she said simply in a low tone. Draco's mouth tightened, but he turned to the girls and gestured. I will meet with you later, Parkinson, Greengrass. Excuse us. Hermione didn't look away from his face as he spoke, seeing both annoyance and a trickle of anger underneath his cold facade. She heard the girls continue walking, and Draco grabbed her own arm in turn and led her aside into a classroom, shutting the door firmly behind him. What is it, Hermione? He folded his arms, adopting a defensive posture. Hermione took a deep breath, released it. I'm not going to waste time asking you to apologize, but I want you to know that what you did was wrong. Draco gaped before sputtering. Apologize? Wrong? Are you off your rocker? She stood straight, not backing down. No, I'm perfectly seated in my rocker, Draco Malfoy. You broke Colin's camera in a petty gesture of revenge for something that is none of your concern. Did you even ask the boy if he was sorry? Draco hissed out in reply, his fists clenching. Sorry, none of my concern. He took Harry's picture without his permission and sold it to the Daily Prophet. Slytherins look out for their own. Hermione scoffed, her tone biting like acid. Stop using the word Slytherin as if it's God. You didn't do this for your house, Draco. You did it for yourself. What did you accomplish? Tell me that. Colin is a second-year Gryffindor who had already lost his friends and now walks about like a ghost. He's only talked to his brother once in the last 3 days. Everyone is worried about him, and rumors are flying about his camera getting broken and how. He's carrying around the fragments in his bag like a talisman. Draco, you broke him. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it. He stood coldly, posture stiff. Hermione continued relentlessly. Colin is just a boy. Your real enemy, from what I can see, is that dratted Rita Skeeter. She approached him here at Hogwarts. A student saw her. No one knows how she even got inside the castle, or how she even knew about Colin taking that picture. Tell me this, Draco, who told her? Who was there that day who could have not only seen it happen, but contact a bloodthirsty journalist to get the picture and story? Who would know her name? Who wins? She saw the reaction spread across his face, saw his already fair skin pale. She waited a beat. Well, Draco, who? Blanche slowly relaxed, his arms falling to his side and shoulders drooping from their rigid posture. His eyes gleamed with emotion, though his face remained ruthlessly neutral. I get your point, Granger. Hermione flushed, snarling. Don't Granger me, you moron. Take out your snipiness on your blasted father where it belongs. She roughly brushed past him, reaching for the door. Draco grabbed her arm, halting her progress as he looked down at her and spoke in a slow and reluctant voice. I'm sorry, Hermione. She met his eyes, sniffed in annoyance, and yanked her arm loose. Opening the door, she glanced back at him with angry eyes. Tell that to Colin. She slammed the door behind her for good measure and stomped all the way to the great hall. Only once she arrived did she pause and begin to smile. She had managed to get the impossible, an apology from Draco Malfoy. In the darkness of his room, Harry planned, only the light from the wide moon highlighting his paper. It would be simple, really. A few runic algorithms, helpfully developed by Flamel. a warning system triggered by magical sensor. He had looked over the school from the air many times. He knew the places to hide. It would be the caves in the nearby hillsides or the depths of the forest. Monitoring the caves would be a simple case of placing his traps sporadically by night and waiting for a trigger. The forest created extra difficulty with the dense cover and the centaurs. He doubted the herd would appreciate wizarding magic in their woods. Harry placed a note on the page, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He would need to speak with Magorian if he planned to hunt in the woods. The simpler solution would be to monitor from the air, but the Dementor's presence nixed that solution. The blasted creatures were a hindrance all around, their dark magic tinting the air with despair. It was a wonder the student population was holding up so well, and he could only assume it was because they simply did not notice. Perhaps they thought their melancholy was due to schoolwork or breakups or arguments. But Harry could see it, a grey mist full of screaming agony, pushing against the wards of Hogwarts and caressing its stones with skeletal fingers. At times, it seemed Hogwarts herself groaned beneath the touch, and he could feel her anger snapping at the Dementors in tones of white and purple. It made him dizzy to walk the outer halls, made him pause to lay a hand on the stone wall beside him and close his eyes, his magic seeking to ground itself again. He liked to think Hogwarts was sorry for the stairs seemed to take him where he needed to go fastest, and even the hallways themselves warped beneath his feet in rolling, pebbled response. He ignored the glances he got from students and teachers alike, preferring to spend his time in the library and his room, planning. He had a lot to implement in a short time, and he refused to let Black roam the area freely, not after what he had done. He might not have remembered his parents, might not have known their love, but Black had been the tool to take all the possibilities from him. Harry doubted it was easy, or that Voldemort was a kind master, but the man had betrayed his family, the one he was meant to have. Harry would have the truth, one way or another, and did not think beyond having the man's mind grasped within his own. Terry Boot had always admired Hermione Granger from afar. The Muggle-born witch had tenacity, a way of either ignoring or overcoming any obstacle in her way. He has been amazed when she came out as one of the top of their first year in grades, something that rarely happened among those who had just learned of the wizarding world. He had been too nervous to approach her the previous year, when her friendship with Harry had isolated her from their classmates. He had imagined many times defending her, standing up to Weasley and his crowd and winning her friendship. But when it came down to it, he had watched with dismay instead, and it had been Harry Potter that had taken a stand. Then it had been too late. Hermione had been petrified, and everything had seemed to fall apart. This year he had thought would be different. But when he tried to sit with her in the few classes Ravenclaw shared with Gryffindor, she was always with Neville Longbottom. When he had approached her once in Ancient Runes, an elective class that all houses shared jointly, he had been blocked by a scowling Draco Malfoy. The Slytherin had seemed to be acting as a bodyguard of sorts, a fact he could reluctantly appreciate after hearing rumors of confrontations with other Gryffindors. Still, he had just wanted to talk to her. In the hallways, she had brushed him off, always in a hurry and rushing from class to class. It had to be impossible the amount of classes she was taking. He had tried to figure her schedule out and failed spectacularly. The girl was a mystery, and he adored a good puzzle. So many things were too easy, and he often found himself bored with his classmates and their petty games and ideas. He wanted more real intelligence. There had to be a way to gain her friendship. Quit staring, Terry. He looked up as Padma Patil sat beside him in the great hall, her eyes rolling his disgust. He sighed, glancing back down the table where the Gryffindors sat beside Luna Lovegood. Quit griping, Padma. The girl tossed her long black hair over her shoulder, eyes narrowed. Give it up. Now that Potter's back, you don't stand a chance in a million of getting close to her. Move on. Terry frowned, looking down at his meal. Move on from what? A chipper voice asked, and Terry glanced up as Sully slid in across from them, smiling. Terry nudged his food with his fork, looking down. He didn't have long to wait as Padma took up the question with glee. Terry here is mooning over Granger again. Sue hummed sympathetically. Terry whipped his head up, gritting his teeth. I am not mooning, Padma. It's not like that at all. She's just... I mean, haven't you wondered why she isn't in Ravenclaw? She should be. She's top of the class. And Padma cut him off, her tone sarcastic. Oh, please, spare me the reiteration of her paragon virtues. Besides, she's pretty much in Ravenclaw now. Sue spoke up, glancing between the two of them with darting eyes. I talked to Luna yesterday. Well, I tried to. She said Hermione is very much a Gryffindor. At least I think that's what she meant. You know, brave, courageous. Padma slammed her fork down, glaring. Sue stopped speaking, biting her lip while shrugging in apology. Terry sighed, gently nudging Padam with his shoulder. Sorry, girls. I just think she would be a great addition to our own study group. She's in most of our classes and all. You've told us. Padam stabbed a piece of meat. More than once. Just go up and ask her, will you? Put us all out of our misery. Terry looked down at his plate, absently moving his potatoes from one side to the other. He didn't understand what Padma had against the Gryffindor. Sue got along with her fine, and he didn't peg Padma as a pureblood elitist. She hung out with Sue after all, who was a half-blood herself. His brows furrowed in thought. Maybe she just didn't want to extend their study group of 3 to include anyone else. His mom had said it was odd enough Terry had so many female friends. He just found them easier to get along with, and honestly much more mature. With the exception of Anthony Goldstein, he found the boys in his house tedious. I always wanted to talk about Quidditch pranks, or more and more recently, girls. There was more out there than that to discover, to learn. And he loved to learn everything he could get his hands on, his mind always seeking to find something new, something grand and wonderful, the way magic connected to the outside world and with itself, the relation between the different studies of magic, their attributes. Terry, are you listening? He quickly looked up, his blank expression causing Padma to scowl. He scratched the back of his neck, sitting up with a sigh. Sorry. She looked him over again, eyes dark, before continuing. I was saying, you should try to corner your little bookworm in the library. Her friends do not seem to follow her into there very often. Sue and I have seen her there a few times during our free period. Terry brightened. He didn't go much to the library himself, preferring to check out any books he needed and retreat to a private reading room within Ravenclaw Tower. He had thought that Hermione must do the same, but perhaps she liked the wide tables in the library. Sue giggled at his expression. I think she would work great in our study group. I was thinking of maybe inviting a few others too, especially those in our arithmancy class. I heard next year both ancient runes and arithmancy will begin to link, with algorithms being used to calculate placements within a pentagram or circle. You know, I hate math. Terry nodded absently, mind racing. He had to find a reason to approach her at a table, questions about a paper, perhaps, or advice on a book to study for an upcoming exam. He had a few questions about the new principles they were covering in Transfiguration. Maybe she could help. He pushed his plate away, beginning to stand. He glanced over at the girls, smiling shyly. I'll see you at class. Sue waved at him, still smiling. Padam didn't even glance up. With a shrug at Sue, he turned and left the hall with a bounce in his step. Sue Lee watched her friend eat robotically and internally winced. Terry was absolutely clueless about their mutual friend's feelings, and she figured that was probably for the best. The boy was so typical in some ways, and was probably honest about the way he thought of Hermione. She doubted he had even thought of dating yet, and truly just respected the Gryffindor for her brain. Her brain, she snorted, and Padma looked up. Something funny. Sue quickly shook her head, keeping her bright expression in place. She wore happiness the way a warrior wore armor, and found it just as effective when dealing with enemy fire, or in this case, anger brought on from depression. Padma might be smart, but she also liked to mope. Just thinking about the study group, I think we got a good thing going here. Padma nodded, her lips twisting. It had been her idea at the beginning of the year when they started their electives and realized how much their workload had been increased. Terry, Sue, and Padma had been friends since first year, but having a set time to meet and study had brought them even closer together. Unfortunately, Sue had watched Padam start to take a shine on Terry, something she thought was absolutely ridiculous. She didn't know what was going on with the girls in her year. All they wanted to talk about was boys, who was the most handsome, the smartest, the greatest. She was tired with the whole lot of them, and then her best friend had to fall prey to the same thing. So who you thinking of inviting in? Sue looked up, smiled. Well, I know what you're going to say, but Zacharias Smith. Padma gawked. Smith, you can't be serious. Sue giggled, fiddling with her fork. I know he can be a bit gruff. He's a total ass. Padma deadpanned. Sue laughed. Well, maybe, but you have to admit he is smart. And the other day I saw his arithmancy homework. The puff knows his stuff. She chimed the last bit, and Padma choked on her slice of pie. Sue grinned in triumph, taking a huge bite out of her dessert. Sue Lee 1, Padma Patil 0. Harry, I need to tell you something. He stopped, about to follow the others out of the study room. He noticed Draco glance over, then away again, eyes down. His own narrowed. Something was going on with all of his friends. Only Neville acted as if everything was normal. Harry waited for the door to close to turn to face Hermione. What is going on? Blaise and Draco are having some sort of tiff, and Draco will barely look at you. I'm used to you two arguing my ears off. Hermione looked down, biting her lip and shifting. Harry sighed and sat at one of the large desks, waiting. Finally, Hermione spoke. Have you talked to Colin? His mind went blank. Who? Hermione sighed, and took a seat as well, drumming her fingers on the table in a show of nerves. Colin Creevey. Second-year Gryffindor. He took the photo of you in the paper last year. Harry thought back and remembered the rough picture of him walking down the hallways, roughed up and ragged from his confrontation in the Chamber of Secrets. He's a second year. Why would I talk to him? Hermione suddenly laughed, shaking her head. Harry leaned back, completely confused. After a minute, Hermione stopped, meeting his gaze. Maybe because half the school are in awe of him and thinks he has a death wish for daring to not only photograph you, but to take it to the papers. The other half wants to grant his wish. And before you came back, someone broke his camera. She drifted off, but Harry got the gist of it. He folded his arms. Ostracized. Hermione nodded. Yeah, I guess that's a good enough word for it. I think people expected you to attack him or something, especially when it got around that you were back and all. People don't know you at all. Harry considered, then spoke. Perhaps if it had been a picture meant to purposefully harm one of you, I would have been angry. The article accompanying it was blatantly false, but the headmaster took care of it in the following week, with both Aura reports and updated photos. It was a sensationalized article, that's all. Slanted to sell papers, and the photo was bold. Colin has talent, I admit. He said the last ruefully, but with a hint of steel in his voice. Hermione frowned. Harry, I don't know Colin that well, but I really don't think he meant it to come across like that. This whole thing is fishy to me. I did some research. Harry raised a brow. You, research? Hermione rolled her eyes. Honestly, Skeeter came from nowhere with this. She had to have an inside source. She's scum, Harry. I've read a few more of her articles. She absolutely hates Dumbledore. Imagine that. Harry murmured under his breath. Hermione continued. Colin was friends with a few Gryffindors before all this happened. They didn't even know he had taken that photo. They thought he was being, oh, I don't know, stealthy or something. Which makes no sense cause he used to be this annoying bubbly person, always snapping pictures and showing them off. I guess he could have been scared of you, I would have been, but that doesn't explain how Rita knew about the photo. And here is the kicker, Harry. She came here. He didn't contact her first, or he would have just mailed the photo. She came here and no one knows how. Harry sighed, spreading his hands out in a loose gesture. I can tell you are working up to something, Hermione, but why does it matter? It's over. It's just a photo. Hermione bit her lip, shaking her head. It's not over, Harry, because Colin is devastated by the loss of his camera. It's like his life has been ruined to him, and the person who did it will not apologize or fix it. People think you did it somehow, I think, or you supported it at least. No evidence has been given to the contrary. What? Harry narrowed his eyes, and just as suddenly it all clicked into place, the coincidences piling up one after another. He sat up sharply. Draco and Blaise. Hermione flushed bright red. Harry growled. Which one? Which Slytherin? You know who are you protecting? Hermione groaned and leaned back in her chair. Harry, please, I just want to stop this right now. Break the cycle and get things back to normal, please. It doesn't matter, I think. I think they have seen the error of their ways, at least. Maybe. She groaned again. Harry stood and fell back into his habitual posture when frustrated. He paced. Hermione watched him and quietly spoke again. I'm sorry for beating around the bush. I think Lucius Malfoy saw Colin and told Rita Skeeter, who harassed Colin into selling the photo. I saw Colin that day in the Great Hall. He was horrified. I was seated only a few places away from him. Lucius Malfoy. Harry growled the name and turned to face her. I didn't think of it before, but it makes perfect sense. I had bested him, had claimed his house elf. It was an insult, but one he deserved. I should not have expected him to take it quietly. He was right there in the hallways with me. As it was, the damage he sought to inflict was minimal, thanks to Dumbledore. Hermione nodded and stood with a tired sigh. Harry, I just thought, maybe you could talk to him. I know you don't know him, and I know you got a lot on your mind. Just take some time, please, before the end of the year. He's linked to you now, whether any of us like it or not. If something happens to him, it's going to fall back on you if it can. Harry watched her, saw the emotion behind her eyes. Softly he spoke, and saw the relief spread over her features. I'll take care of it. Hermione stepped forward, throwing her arms about him in a tight hug before just as quickly stepping back and away, looking down. Thanks, Harry. He nodded, and Hermione left the room, grabbing her bag up off the floor. He watched her go, his mind frozen in surprise at the gesture. Dread hissed inside his mind, his voice sibilant and amused. Females. They love to wrap their calls about you given the chance. Always a rough affair. You should be more careful. Harry choked out a laugh, shaking his head, before gathering his things and exiting the room. He had one more thing to worry about now besides Black, and had absolutely no idea how to approach a terrified young Gryffindor and make right something he did not do wrong. It did not take more than 2 days for Harry to develop a deep hate for the dark spectres crowding the sky around the school. Dementors, forces of darkness and evil, in his opinion, and far too close to the grounds. They made it impossible for him to fly at night, and when he walked out onto the grounds they floated close, the dark holes within the hoods of their cloaks echoing with whispers. He had felt their presence reaching for his mind, reaching out to taste and take his memories, and felt the rune on his forehead warm and burn. Mem would not allow them access, but could not stop the cold shivers that rippled up his spine, nor prevent the effects of their presence souring his mood. When he mentioned as much to Hermione, the girl had grumbled in agreement. She had told him of the foul reactions most students had, and that some even fainted with horrible memories brought to the forefront. With this in mind, and hating the weakness he could see in his best friends at the mention of the creatures, he decided to visit the new defense against the dark arts teacher. If there was one who could perform the spell other than the headmaster, it should be him. With Hermione's glowing recommendation, he had decided to ask the man himself for help. His first impression of Remus Lupin was that he was a slightly shabby wizard, most likely poor, but had a gentle presence about him. His second was of danger, of malicious rage held in tight check, or ravenous hunger and caged anger. Harry almost flinched at the two opposing impressions, one from his eyes and the other from his mind. He made himself walk into the room to meet the curious hazel eyes. Professor Lupin, he asked quietly, and saw the eyebrows raise, the emotion pass over the face as his identity was realized. Yes, may I help you, Mr. Potter? I was informed your defense exam was to be held tomorrow. Harry nodded and waved off the statement with an absent hand. He forced himself to ignore the angry magical aura revolving about the core of the wizard in front of him, a part of him trying to analyze and categorize what could cause such a phenomenon. Can you perform the Patronus charm? Lupin's confusion faded to understanding, and the brown-haired professor stood, making his way around his desk. I can. Are you having difficulty with the Dementors as well? You are not the first to approach me about the charm, though many did not know its name. I can read, Harry said simply, and saw another flicker of emotion pass along the professor's face at the disrespect. But the wizard did not respond, his face not even crinkling in anger, even as the aura inside rolled faster, howling hate. Harry spoke again, leaking impatience into his tone. The Patronus charm is a requirement for any who wish to go beyond the basics of defense, as it has applications against many forms of dark creatures, not just Dementors. It can also be used to convey messages. I wish to see you perform it, and learn it myself so that I may teach my friends. Professor Lupin's brows raised again, and a gentle look came over his face. The aura stilled slightly, pacing impatiently like a tiger in a tight cage. I am more than willing to show you the charm, but I must warn you it is most difficult. It is usually not covered until at least 5th year, and not expected to be castable until your 7th. Harry did not bother to argue, but waved his hand with an inquiring gesture. The professor frowned, but raised his wand, intoning with a solemn shout of power. Expecto Patronum. Harry watched as magic gathered, not just from the wizard's core but from the mind, a flicker of light, before it poured forth from the wand in a silvery mist, rolling and spasming, before forming into the corporeal shape of a large wolf, fur bristling as it cast about with its nose, eyes gleaming with silver fire. Harry felt his breath hitch, the beauty of it as startling as the power he felt echoing off its form. It paced the room once, twice. Then with a last glance towards Harry, it began to dissolve slowly, lifting its snout to the sky as if to take one last long scent. Harry turned back to the professor, allowing the awe he felt to show. "That is amazing, Professor. What is required to cast such a spell? It was very powerful." Lupin nodded idly, pocketing his wand. "It is a very powerful spell, and possesses two forms. The highest is what you saw, a corporeal patronus. The lesser is simply the silvery mist that might hold off a single Dementor for a time, but not long. A corporeal patronus requires strength of will, not just power. You have to envision a purely happy thought, one not tinged by sadness or anger. This happiness fuels the patronus. The form it takes is personalized, and usually represents either the caster or someone the caster thinks of as more important than themselves, a spouse or child. It is always an animal. The size also represents the power of the patronus, not its form. I have seen a rabbit patronus as large as a bear, and a deer as small as a mouse. Amusement twisted the professor's lips, his eyes vague as if seeing some fond memory long ago. Harry allowed the silence to grow, his thoughts spinning. Did he have a purely happy thought, one that did not also cause him grief? His time at the cottage, Fox accepting him as a brother, his friends at the school, Mr. Potter. He looked up at the inquiry and smiled. "Sorry, Professor, I was attempting to think of a happy thought." Harry saw the sadness cross the defense professor's face and frowned. He did not need pity. He stood up straight, squared his shoulders. "How happy does it need to be, exactly? Does it have to be a memory, or can it be a feeling?" Lupin spread his hands, voice soft. "It needs to be a memory that causes happy feelings. Happiness itself is linked to memories. How strong the patronus is often linked to the strength of the memory." Harry nodded and pulled out his wand, holding it in his left defensive hand. He ignored the look in the professor's eyes of polite disbelief. He raised his wand, closing his eyes in thought. Something that made him happy, a memory. Care, smiling in welcome. Tiny, eyes alight with joy at a small bird in a cage. But Tiny was no longer that happy boy. His thoughts turned. Hermione, grinning in her room at her parents' house. Her worried look as he spoke of visiting the Steels. A frown worked its way on his face. There had to be something. Something that ended with happiness. Something that could be used as a weapon against the dark hopelessness of the Dementors. Something that could not be changed to despair. Something eternal and powerful and peaceful. Flamel, his hands gentle on his shoulders, his soft voice. The lines of age growing on his face, the wisdom shining there, the quiet acceptance. His voice echoing with years spent in both hardship and ease. "All things end, child." He opened his eyes, the vision swimming in front of him, the aged philosopher's pyre burning in Egypt, the phoenixes surrounding him with their forms and song, and the peace he felt at knowing Flamel had lived well and died well, giving in with grace to the tug of time. He could feel that magic once more pressing on him with ancient oppressive power, too great to be contained in such a frail form. Expecto Patronum. It was not a shout, as the defense professors had been, but a soft whisper, and in it he could almost hear another voice, just as he had heard the echo behind Flamel's last words to him in farewell. And the peace inside him grew as the mist formed from his wand, springing forth like fog, rolling with the wisps of magic and memory, and he saw eyes forming, glowing with fervent emotion, followed by smooth fur and graceful limbs, until it was a large cat in front of him. Transparent silver hide dotted with darker oblong spots, resembling a jaguar, he supposed. It had Flamel's regal bearing and smooth expression of subtle but great power. He grinned, reaching out a hand to touch the cool mist, his hand passing through it as easily as air. The large cat turned, its whiskers brushing his chest, and with a happy sigh he let the link fall, the form fading into nothingness. His smile grew wider, and he stared for a time into the distance, feeling as if for a moment he had stood in the presence of his mentor. A cough brought his attention around to Professor Lupin, who stared with a mix of confusion and shocked disbelief. "That was most surprising. You are very talented." Harry shrugged, the fog over his mind beginning to clear. He realized he had just given away something of the scope of his power, and probably would have been better off to attempt the spell in private. He doubted the man would keep secret what had just happened when Harry cast the spell, but there was nothing he could do about it now. With a grateful nod, Harry quietly spoke to the professor. "Thank you for the demonstration and the guidance. I appreciate it." Lupin nodded and seemed at a loss. Even the odd aura within the man had fallen still from its fervent pacing, giving off a wary edge. Harry felt the smile reluctantly work its way back on his face, and left without another word, walking from the room with his mind filled with peace. Remus looked down at his wand, his thoughts in turmoil. His first sight of Harry Potter since he was a child, outside of the newspapers, and he was filled with confusion. It had taken all he had not to pull the boy into a hug, to smother him with protection from the sadness he had seen haunting his eyes. He had been more than willing to allow the boy to practice a charm he knew the boy could never cast, not in third year. Had wanted to speak to him of his father, of their friendship, of the years spent at Hogwarts pulling pranks and casting spells, and had felt sadness boiling up as the boy had struggled so obviously with finding a happy memory, had been about to reach out a comforting hand and tell him it was all right. This was a hard spell. He would make plenty of happy memories, to just give it time. And then the boy had opened eyes glowing emerald green with power and emotion, and from his wand had leaped a large spotted cat, lean and muscled and smug, turning its regal form to behold the two of them with amusement. He had felt himself stop breathing under its regard, an almost alien intelligence reaching out, and his heart stuttered at the power required to so accurately portray the essence of a person fondly remembered, and wondered who it represented to the young boy standing so calmly beside him, a smile widening on his face, and taking away that impression of age beyond his years, leaving behind an innocent young boy. After Harry had left, leaving a still shocked Remus behind, without even a spoken goodbye, he had sat at his desk. Only then did he wonder why he had not seen what he had expected, a deer, a stag with pronged antlers, the boy's father. But why was he surprised? The boy had not known his father, could not remember the first year of his life. With a groan, he laid his head in his hands, tamping down the wolf inside, its anger so very near to the surface as the moon waxed large behind the blue sky. He knew Ron was following him. Harry could see the shock of red hair from the corner of his eyes as he turned a corner, found him a crowd when passing through the halls. It didn't bother him as much as it should have, perhaps. What could the boy do? He reminded himself of termites and the damage such tiny creatures could wreak on a large, strong structure. Nothing and nobody was harmless, but they sure as hell could be annoying. It had also become obvious that the Gryffindor was not the only one keeping tabs on him. All of the teachers seemed to note his presence and take the time for a greeting or small conversation. Each stop made his anger simmer, though he kept such feelings hidden. He could not let his need for privacy show, not when things were so on edge. He has passed all his exams, as he had expected. Potions could have gone better, but he knew it was at least acceptable. Professor Snape had seemed more interested in ignoring his presence than actually observing his brewing, though he doubted the man had missed a single portion. Both astronomy and history were simple written exams, probably the same ones the students would later face in a month's time. He had also taken the exam for ancient runes and arithmancy, as each subject had been covered in depth by Flamel. He had been surprised at the simplicity of the test, the basic algorithms. He had had no idea just how far into the material he had gone with the constant reading and practice. Flamel had never given away that he was teaching advanced material, had never shown surprise at what Harry was capable of. Charms and transfiguration had not gone as planned on both the professor's part and his own. Harry wanted to slap himself for being so careless, for being so easily tricked. He had not bothered to research what third years actually learn, and so had not even considered whether the spells asked of him were on par with his year level. He had simply performed the spells, received acknowledgement of his success, and left. Only when discussing the nature of the exams with an eager Hermione had the subterfuge become known to him. Each charm had been fifth-year levels, and the transfigurations had been a segment of transmutation that was only covered in theory, not practical in third year. Harry had paled when Hermione told him so, and his anger had caused him to jump from his seat and frantically pace before he got his emotions under control. He knew Dumbledore had been behind that stunt, and that it had been a test. Why the headmaster cared what level magic he could do he did not know, but he did not want that knowledge submitted to the ministry. He was already considered dangerous enough. The defense professor, however, had given him a straightforward test on various dark creatures and the known defenses against them. Harry's respect for the man grew, even as his wariness did. He was not a fool, and after only a brief conversation with Hermione had put a name to the anger beneath the man's calm face. There was only one curse that waxed and waned with the moon's pale face. While he doubted the man had any sinister purpose, he did wonder if his parents had known, and how he was hiding his condition from the school. The reason was obvious, as with the new regulations, no werewolf could hold a job that put them in contact with wizarding children. That, unfortunately, did not leave many jobs available to the creatures. A curse was a curse, in Harry's opinion, but wizarding kind had put further curses atop the original by restricting their lives. Without a job, there was no money, and with no money, there were few options in life. One of the few remaining was criminal activity, and the werewolves all took to it with varying degrees of reluctance. The Packs of Britain, who once had a culture and society all their own, were forced into degeneracy, just another victim of society's fearful ignorance. The wolf scented the air, thick with the smells of the human race, a mix of food and waste and sweat underlaced with chemicals. The metallic scent of magic, cast and cast often, the aroma of potions, ingredients and flowers, and the animal odor of cats and birds and rats. Strength filled him, his paws strong and legs muscled, and he longed to stretch, to test the boundaries of his body. He paced the room, corner to corner to corner, pausing by the locked door. For a brief moment he considered how easy it would be to break through, to hit the wood at the exact spot where grain met grain, to push muscle and fur through and out where it was free, where he could run and scent and sink fang into hot flesh. No. With a growling huff, the wolf turned, falling onto a rug placed by the fireplace. He curled his thick tail about himself, and over his nose, amber eyes staring into the dancing flame. He did not like the voice. It was new and powerful and dangerous, and when it spoke he had to obey. It did not let him run, did not let him hunt. It used to be weak, the small squeak of a terrified mouse, squirming under his paws and tread underfoot. When he burst forth from the pink skin of the frail monster he was trapped within, he had reveled in the freedom, had lived and delighted in it, in sense of woodland and hill and cliff, in the coppery taste of life and magic on his tongue. But now the monster controlled him instead. The alien made him obey, and he raged all the stronger for it, tearing his claws into the foreign master who held him in check, seeking to destroy and punish and escape, but he could not. He wanted to howl to the mother moon, to sing his agony and woe, but even that was denied him, forced to stay silent and still like a muzzled dog. He would not be stopped forever. He had been free before once, and would be so again. And he would unleash his hatred upon all the monster held dear, on every pale face he saw in its dreams, sinking his muzzle into their muscle and breaking bone, shredding skin beneath his claws, ripping and slashing. No. The wolf closed his eyes, soaking in the warmth wafting from the fire. Let the voice speak its commands. He would sleep and escape into dreams where the voice held no reign over him, and where blood ran in rivers of grey and black. In the end, Harry simply slipped under his father's cloak and left the castle in the night. In his pack, he had all the materials he needed for the warded traps, and in a matter of hours had placed the traps about the hillside, jogging from site to site while keeping a careful watch on the sky. The moon was nearly full, and with a cloudless night was as good to see by as torchlight. The Dementors blended with the darkness between the stars, but he could make them out when they moved, shadows against the dark sky. A quick trip under his cloak, and the creatures seemed to lose the scent, which only raised more questions in his mind. An invisibility cloak shielded the body from sight, but Dementors did not hunt by sight. They followed feelings, happiness and anger, the heated emotions of the soul. That his cloak blocked his mind from mental surveillance raised more questions into its origin and purpose. Questions only one person could answer, and Harry had no desire to approach the headmaster for anything other than a good scathing argument. He would not easily forget that the man had tricked him into showing his skill in the exams. Once the last ward was placed, he quickly walked to the edge of the forest, staring inside it for some time. He knew he could simply travel by flame back into the castle. He also knew he could travel to the center of the forest, to his clearing, just as easily. But there was something about slipping from the castle on his own 2 feet, something about traveling in a normal way. He couldn't simply teleport wherever he wanted to go. Or perhaps he could, but shouldn't. He enjoyed stretching his legs, enjoyed running across the landscape at night under the sky, enjoyed the rush of adrenaline at the thought of coming upon Black himself. His body thrived on the danger, his mind on the riddle. He needed to be normal in some ways. Needed to be reminded that he was not omnipotent, not the strongest creature in the forest. With that thought, he stepped into the woods, letting his cloak fall from his shoulders, bundling it inside his bag. He did not try for stealth, but walked boldly, knowing they would be waiting and watching. For an hour he walked, as the sky began to lighten in preparation for dawn, the trees now cast in shades of gray and brown, the shadows of night twisting into shadows of day. Then he heard the hoof stamp and stopped, waiting as the sounds drew closer, turning to meet deep brown eyes, the pupils wide and dark, a horse eye. Harry bowed slightly, lowering his gaze to the ground, not pausing at the sight of the weapon clasped in a human's fingers. Bane. He was answered with a snort, the centaur's tail swishing almost violently. Wizard. Harry inclined his head in acknowledgement of both category and insult. He had no love for many of his kind either. I have come to ask 2 things. The centaur stilled, his eyes unreadable before he tossed his head in an aggravated gesture. You may ask. Harry held himself straight and tall, not looking down or away. He spoke with a firm voice, weighing each word as it crossed his mouth. Nothing spoken to centaurs was ever simple. Have you seen the wizard Sirius Black? Is he hiding here? The centaur stamped one solid black hoof against the ground, his tail flicking at some unseen annoyance. Wizards have already come to ask us these questions. The response is the same. No. Harry nodded, and with another bow turned to leave. Wizard. He stopped, waiting as he heard an annoyed grunt behind him. For you, we will say more. Harry faced the Bane again, clasped his hands together. He did not smile, knowing now that such a gesture meant something different to the horse people. A baring of teeth was aggression, challenge. Bane reached behind him, pulling out a tuft of some sort of fur. In the low light it gleamed ebony. The wizard you seek has another form. It has walked through our forests before, many seasons ago, in the company of both wizards and a cursed one. Its appearance now is only vaguely different, its intent only warped by wizarding devilry. We will not help capture this human, though the stars predict much grief and madness to us. Harry's thoughts whirled, looking from the hair to the centaur's face. When he saw the centaur was done speaking, he nodded. Thank you for this information. I am grateful. Bane nodded regally, his face impassive. Farewell. Harry glanced at the lightened sky side. Then, holding his bag, he called up the phoenix flame within him and jumped into his room. If he did not hurry, he would be late for breakfast. Hermione was annoyed. No, scratch that, she was downright pissed. Harry comes back, and the world decided to go bonkers. She fumed as she walked through the halls, seeing how the students seemed to part around her as she carried the plague, how their eyes darted down and away. Her roommates had actually tried to talk to her last night, and this morning Parvati had smiled at her. She knew it was because of Harry. It had to be. He waltzed back into Hogwarts, and suddenly Hermione was a person again, someone who was worth more interest than the casual, spiteful Jinx. All the pranks had stopped overnight, and those who would normally smirk and scoff at her kept a fearful distance. It made her furious. She knew it wasn't fair to be angry at Harry. He couldn't help himself, staking his claim boldly over both her and Luna at the Ravenclaw table, staring combatively at anyone who looked at her wrong. Harry just wanted her to be happy, and his very presence in the castle intimidated their classmates. No, she was mad at the idiotic students. Why couldn't they respect her for herself? She entered the library and set her books down on a table with a puff of breath and a sharp slam, earning an annoyed look from the librarian. She couldn't bring herself to care and sat with an angry movement, flipping madly through the top tome, mentally ranting to herself. It just wasn't fair. Hermione didn't want to be known as Harry's friend. She didn't want people to treat her differently because they were scared of Harry. Damn it, she wanted them to be scared of her, and she wouldn't stand for this any longer, not 1 minute. She was going to learn more spells if it killed her, learn about declino and shields and auras and practice, practice, practice. She loved her friends, but she wasn't going to be known as anything other than Hermione Jane Granger. Looking for something. The voice made her tense, but she forced her shoulders to relax. A polite smile plastered on her face as she looked up. It was a Ravenclaw boy, his brown hair smoothed back. She searched her mind before the name came to her. Terry Boot, third year. He had been Harry's partner in something, if she remembered correctly. At the moment it escaped her. She looked down at her book, saw she had turned to the section on defensive charms. I'm just researching. As if that was an invitation, Terry slid in across from her with a curious expression. Reluctantly, Hermione slid the tome across to him, the Ravenclaw looking it over with raised eyebrows. This is quite advanced. Hermione felt herself flush and yanked the book back while clearing her throat. Yes, well, everything worth knowing is. Terry smiled genuinely, leaning over to pull out a book of his own. She glanced at the spine and saw it was a history book. Interesting. Indeed, I agree. Paused, eyes flickering around them, before abruptly leaning forward and beginning to read his own book, leaving Hermione staring in consternation. What was this boy's motive? With reluctance, she looked down and tried to ignore his presence. She couldn't quite pick up her previous train of thought, her anger drained with the new puzzle before her. After a while, she focused on her own book, pulling out her notebook and beginning to write notes. She was determined to find something other than a simple Pratigo charm. Everyone and their grandma knew that one. There had to be something better, something capable of blocking both physical and magical objects. The bell charm only blocked physical, and it of course was a horrible detractant with the noise it created. Not to mention, she couldn't get her mouth around the syllables. Tintinnabulum. How on earth had Blaise managed it? She must have been sitting there for a while when she felt the hair on the back of her neck raise with alertness, and noticed that across from her Terry had froze midway through the action of turning his page, his eyes locked behind her. Hermione casually looked, and saw Harry's bright green eyes focused on her as he approached. The library, already quiet, had descended into silence. The annoyance Hermione had been feeling returned, in force. Couldn't people just treat him like a normal person? She glared at a group gawking fourth years nearby, and they quickly looked away. Harry reached her and sat, locking eyes with Terry. Boot. Terry dropped the page in his hand and nodded briskly. Potter. As if there was nothing strange about her sitting with Terry, Harry reached inside the bag he had slung over his shoulder and pulled out a large leather-bound book, placing it beside her and flipping to a marked page. He didn't so much as glance again at the Ravenclaw, and in fact seemed to have forgotten his very presence. Terry shifted in his seat, glanced at her, then determinedly looked down at his own book. Harry spoke, and Hermione quickly looked back at him, but he was frowning down at the book. Hermione, I have an issue. This section describes the basic regulations imposed on werewolves, states they go back to the mid-17th century. It also describes various means of caging and restricting their movements during moon cycles. It lists here. Harry paused, flipping a page, then pointed. Hermione leaned over the book, her mind racing. Werewolves. Could he possibly already be on to their defense professor, or was it something else? Harry continued to speak, his voice low but audible enough that she glanced nervously at Terry, who appeared engrossed in his research, though his eyes did not move across the page. Look. A spell, simple enough, that would place a silver collar about the target. On werewolves untransformed, it started an allergic reaction that quickly deviated into a rash. On werewolves in their cursed state, it caused death by poisoning within an hour. It was proscribed as illegal when the creatures and beings movement happened in the mid-19th century. Its spell word and technique is not mentioned. See. Now. Harry reached down, grasped another book, and casually flipped it open to another section. This book was even thicker than the last and had a strong leather smell to it. The shiny binding lended to the notion that it was new. When she saw the dates, she realized it was very new. Here, new laws passed this last summer. Lupus torquum, a spell listed as being used to control rabid creatures. Uncontested, supposedly a new spell. Harry paused, his eyes meeting her with expectation. Hermione's mind jumped to the Latin meaning, and she opened her mouth to speak. Wolf Carla. Two turned to Terry, who flushed bright red. Sorry, couldn't help but listen there. Hermione cleared her throat, speaking nonchalantly as she looked down at the book, turning the focus back to the topic at hand. No problem. Harry, you think this is that spell? Harry's eyes darkened, and he looked back down with a frown. I think it might be. The spell, when cast using the clockwise whirl then loop twist wand movement, conjured a leather collar with studded silver knobs on the inside of the strap. It appears to be an old spell from Rome. The gladiators enjoyed their sport in the arena. The knobs would allow enough pain to enrage the wolf but not incapacitate it. Hermione blanched. But that would mean that the purpose of the spell is not to contain it all. Harry slammed the book in front of her closed with a sharp gesture that made her jump in her seat. Perhaps that other spell was a different type, pure silver, used for defensive purposes only. Obviously it was abused, for it to be banned. But this new one, whether it's the same or not, seems to be for the sole purpose of making a werewolf react in an aggressive manner. With the advent of the wolfsbane potion 5 years ago, things had finally improved. Werewolf attacks went down by an exponential amount, despite the high price tag. As of this year, the potion had decreased in price by half because of mass producers responding to increased demand. There was movement to relax the regulation of werewolves, to allow them to get jobs with the public again. They would register, of course, and be required to take the potion under surveillance, but it would have improved their status by leaps and bounds. Harry looked up, meeting her gaze. Hermione swallowed, but before she could speak, Terry once more interrupted. You doing research for Professor Snape's essay too? Hermione got to see Harry in a rare moment of total confusion. His eyes glazed slightly, brows furrowing. What? Terry flushed, looked down then back up again with a forced smile. You know, the one we had assigned in defense. Harry's eyes narrowed. Hermione could almost see the gears turning. Professor Snape doesn't teach defense. Terry shrugged, looking over at Hermione with an encouraging glance. Well, you know, Professor Lupin gets sick a lot. Professor Snape usually subs for him. Everyone knows he's always wanted the position. Just last week, Professor Snape assigned us an essay on werewolves. I thought, maybe you were doing it too. Terry chuckled nervously. Harry moved his gaze away, back to Hermione. She could see the knowledge there, glimmering out from his emerald green eyes. She nodded. Harry turned back to the Ravenclaw and smiled. No, I'm not doing an essay myself. I thought I would help Hermione with research in my free time. Hermione wanted to kick him. Terry looked surprised. Hermione, she's top of the class. Harry's smile never dimmed. Casually, he reached out to grab the books off the table and slip them into her bag. I wouldn't expect anything else. I merely have access to books not available in the library. With that statement, he stood, nodded to the both of them, and began to walk away. Hermione gawked and jumped up, motioning awkwardly at her stuff. Terry, I'll be right back. Do you mind watching? Terry shrugged and nodded, curiosity written over his face. Hermione smiled quickly, then turned and hurried after Harry. She caught him just outside the hallway and glared at a passing group of first-years who ducked their heads and hurried inside. Harry. He turned and stopped, crossing his arms with a small smile. She quickly spoke, eyes narrowed. You know about the professor. I don't know how you figured it out so quickly, but tell me, have the rates of werewolf attacks changed? Harry's smile faded, and he met her eyes blankly. They have tripled in the last 2 months. She nodded, her hand reached out to absently touch his arm. Why are you researching this? Harry tilted his head, glanced about, then twisted his fingers in an abrupt motion. Hermione didn't hear anything, but she felt it, a sliding presence against her, a caress before the feeling passed, leaving goosebumps in its wake. She shivered, her arms coming up to hold herself. What was that? Harry leaned forward. I'm trying to be prepared. I know, somehow, Lupin is connected to all this. I talked with the centaurs. They say Black has another form, and when in school used to run with a cursed one. Perhaps Black is a werewolf himself. Perhaps Lupin and he were packmates. It's possible. Hermione nodded slowly, her stomach sinking. She had liked their defense professor and had felt that for once they had gotten lucky with a good one. Him being a werewolf hadn't truly bothered her, beyond the instinctive fear of infection. But Black, are you sure? Harry shook his head, a lock of hair falling into his face as he looked down at the stones beneath their feet. No, I'm not sure of anything at this point, but every avenue must be explored. Snape doesn't trust him, I can tell, but whether that is typical wizard prejudice or not I do not know. Some of the teachers might know, but I doubt they all do. What Dumbledore is allowing here is highly illegal. I'm surprised the headmaster would attempt it. The board knew of this, and knew that Dumbledore knows about his condition well. With his political clout, he might survive intact, but he would take a hit his enemies would joyfully give him. Snape must want people to find out, to be assigning such a blatant S. He must have disagreed with the headmaster over Lupin's employment. As for Black, surely, if he had been a werewolf, that would be all over the papers, unless no one knew. But such a condition could not be hidden in Azkaban. I just don't know. Hermione bit her lip, looked at a passing group of students, and her eyes narrowed as they walked past without the usual flinches and sideways glances. What did you do, exactly? Harry followed her gaze, shrugged, then turned back to her. Hermione, be careful, and tell the others everything when you see them. I won't be coming by tonight. Why not? Hermione blurted, then growled to herself at the pitiful way she sounded. Like a girl. Harry looked away. I'm working on something. She wanted to demand answers, wanted to stomp her feet and glare. She hated feeling left out of the loop, but instead, cursing herself, she nodded and let it go. Harry needed a friend, and part of that came with trust. All right. Harry relaxed from his stiff posture, smiled again. Thanks, Hermione. I'll see you at dinner. She nodded and watched as he turned away. The odd chill rose up her spine again, and a fourth year walking by suddenly jumped sideways, his eyes wide. Hermione glared at him and turned around, marching back into the library to sit down with a growl. Terry looked over at her politely. Problem. She just shrugged her shoulders and opened her book. After a moment, and with a long sideways glance, Terry did the same. Well, did you ask her? Terry looked up at Sue with a miserable face. No. Sue pursed her lips. Why not? Terry sighed, fiddling with his wand as he sat back in the desk in the potions classroom. He had gotten here early, and Sue immediately grabbed the opportunity to hound him. I was sitting there, and I was going to ask her, but she seemed really busy, into her research. Then Potter comes up, and you sat with Harry Potter. Sue bounced in her seat, distracted. Terry groaned. He sat next to Hermione. I might as well have been invisible. Sue frowned, leaning over to pat his knee. I'm sure they didn't ignore you on purpose. Terry rolled his eyes. Sue perked up, eyes bright. Sue, what are you going to do next? Because I invited Zach to meet us this afternoon. Terry bolted upright, staring over at her with shock. What? Zach is in the Hufflepuff. Smith. His voice almost broke in an embarrassing manner, and he felt his face flushing. Sue smiled, taping her fingers on the desk. He agreed, though he was terribly nonchalant about the whole thing. You ask me, he should be grateful to join a study group. He doesn't have many friends. Terry laughed reluctantly at that. Of course he doesn't. He's an annoying Burke. I can't believe you didn't tell me before. Sue laughed. I told Padma and she was okay with it. Terry narrowed his eyes. He very much doubted Padma would be okay with it. Crossing his arms, Terry frowned. Well, if you are inviting Smith, I want to invite Anthony. Sue sniffed. Anthony's nice and all that, but he doesn't add anything to the group we don't have already. Zach is a whiz in arithmancy and really good with transfiguration. Terry grit his teeth. Anthony is in the top 10 of many of our classes, Sue. He's not an idiot. Sue frowned now, leaning forward. Well, I thought we were keeping the group small. Terry met her stare with his own. Well, I thought we were going to agree together who gets in. Sue huffed, then relaxed. Fine, you get Anthony, I get Zach. Then Padma can pick one person and we will have a group of 6. Perfect. Terry gaped. But, what about Hermione? She'll never pick her. Sue shrugged, examining her fingernails. Oh well. Terry fumed, sinking down into his seat. He had the feeling he had just been manipulated by an expert. Sitting beside Terry Boot, Sue managed not to smirk. Now, Padma would be happy not to be staring at Hermione Granger in their study group, and Terry would have another one of his friends to talk to. Surely Anthony, who had to be the nicest boy in their year, could compensate for Zacharias's moodiness. She doubted even Zach could ruffle Anthony's feathers. With a bright smile, Sue reached into her bag to take out her notepad as Professor Snape prowled into the room. Harry walked quickly through the halls, following the back passageways that held fewer students. He hating being here already, hated both the fear and awe he saw in people's eyes. Neither made him comfortable, and neither were desired. He quickened his stride, anxious to return to the privacy of his room. He had needed a sounding board, needed to see if he was simply being paranoid, if he was seeing connections that were not there. When he saw Hermione in the library, he had taken his chance, trying to ignore Boots sitting across from them. Was he one of her friends now? Was it right for him to even ask? He ground his teeth, stepping onto a staircase and bracing himself as the thing jerked into motion. Even as it moved, he continued ascending it, waiting a beat for it to slide into place on the third floor before he began walking again. "Hello, Harry." The soft voice brought him to a halt. He turned, looking down as Luna slowly stood from where she had been kneeling on the floor. Harry shifted, caught off guard by her sudden presence. "Hi." The blonde observed him with a small smile. "How are you?" Harry felt his brows begin to draw together and purposefully smoothed them. "I am well. You?" Luna shrugged elegantly, glancing about her as if checking for some sign. "I seem fine." Harry found himself smiling, and Luna began to smile as well. She reached out and gently took his hand, her silvery eyes wide and guileless. "You need not feel awkward in my presence, Harry. I do not blame you." It felt as if a stone had been dropped into his gullet. He shifted, wanting to back away suddenly, her hand tethering him down as solidly as a chain. Thanks." Luna released him, her smile growing at his discomfort. "Very good. I'd hate to think you had become infested with hillypuffs. They like people who are sad and whisper dark thoughts in their ears. There is only one cure for a hillypuff." Harry forced himself to relax and cocked his head. "What would that be?" Luna grinned, her teeth gleaming. Harry found himself slightly transfixed by her expression and looked away. Luna leaned forward, her voice soft and secretive. "A shot of fire whiskey." Harry gawked, then laughed. Luna grinned, then bent to pick up her bag from off the floor. She wung it over her shoulder, glancing into his eyes. "You have a nice laugh, Harry Potter. Have a good day." And with that, she drifted away, humming idly under her breath. Harry watched her, the humor lingering in his heart. When he turned to continue to his room, the smile was still on his face. He darted from class to class, a small shadow of a boy, grasping his large bag to his chest. He knew Dennis was worried, but avoided his brother with the skill of one now accustomed to blending into the background. He instead watched as Dennis made friends, as he joked and laughed and learned, showing off the spells he was learning, eyes wide and guileless and innocent. At those times he wanted most to step into the light, to join in and simply talk, to blabber on about his day and his thoughts and his love. But he had seen the looks, the mixture of sympathy and anger, the cool gazes that spoke in silent tones. He feared their words and their actions, and feared rubbing off his ill favor onto his beloved brother. "You deserve it, boy." And now Harry Potter was back. He had seen him walk into the hall, felt his heart stop and clench, a hard thump that shook his bones and stole his breath. He waited, the days passing with painful solemnity, for the boy he had wronged to come upon him as his friends had, for his magic to strike like a snake, sinking into his own and drinking him dry. He probably could if he wished. Harry Potter could do anything. He was the boy who lived. What goes around comes around, you know. Colin felt it before he saw him, a thickening of the air, the hair on his neck rising in silent terror. He turned and met the bright green gaze of the boy he had idolized and feared and betrayed. His breath caught on a wheeze of hysteria, his hands shaking so hard his precious bag slipped from his fingers, falling to the stone tile with a sharp, clanging crack. He waited, measuring the seconds in the wild beating of his heart. He saw the boy's mouth move, but couldn't hear the words over the ringing in his ears, and saw the frustration ripple across his face, his hands clenching, his face twisting. In self-defense, Colin closed his eyes, standing frozen and blank, all senses shut off in terror. Then he heard a tinkling sound, like crystal or glass, combined with the harsh tone of metal with the soft plink of plastic. His eyes opened to behold wonder. The boy who lived's hand was gently outstretched, and between them hovered the pieces of his camera, his heart, shattered fragments and cracked filaments, the large bulbous light and the square box, the tiny gears and leather strap. He saw them there and wondered, would they be burnt, turned to dust, simply vanish into air with a silent Evanesco, his punishment completed? Colin. He looked beyond the levitating pieces, met the green eyes. The color of the killing curse was what the article had said. Ever wondered why? Why, yes. Harry Potter looked him over as he qualified and trembled and dropped his hand. Between them, Colin saw movement. He broke the gaze, staring as slowly with grace and purpose. The parts began to turn, spreading out like a diagram in one of his books. Restituo, reparo, reconcino. Recover, repair, rebuild. He saw pieces he had not known he had missed gathering in his careful, teary-eyed search appear, joining their fellows in the elaborate spread before him. Then the bulb snapped back together, the thin tungsten filament inside vibrating slightly with energy. Glass reassembled into a flash, sheathed in shiny bright steel. Then the black box, the square corners fitting together with precision as if cradled in the gentlest of hands. Colin stared at his camera, whole and complete, and could only feel numb with shock. "Take it." He lifted his eyes, staring as the boy who lived gestured impatiently. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't believe. "It's all right." He shook his head first, and the movement seemed to shake something loose inside of him. Again, the tears rose in his eyes, his shoulders beginning to tremble as he tried to hold them back. The boy across from him groaned, and as his eyes blurred, he saw Harry Potter step forward, grasping his camera and looping the leather around his neck, letting the familiar weight rest against his breast. Colin hiccuped, beginning to stutter out words, so many of them scrambling inside his mind and trying to get out all at once. "BB, but you, I, foe, prophet, horrible." A finger lifted his chin up, and Colin found himself held within that stare, his mind swimming with flashes of glowing green and gold, and he could see it all over again as if it was unfolding once more, time twisted and shaken. The crack of the camera, its shattered lens staring up at him with broken reflection. Grey eyes dark with anger. He wouldn't have wanted this. The clip-clop of heels on stone, the smile full of pristine white teeth. "No harm done, Mr. Creevy." Her bright eyes full of ecstatic triumph, the horn-billed glasses bright red, her cherry lipstick, the smell of strong perfume, some scent he could not recognize. "No," Colin said, and the spell was broken. "I won't." His voice was firm, as he wished it had been that day almost a year ago. His eyes cleared, and instead of the journalist it was the boy who lived, his face open and amused. "No, I don't imagine you would, given a second chance." Colin flushed, shaking his head sharply, and Harry Potter stepped back. Colin blurted out his words, mind suddenly sharply clear. "I'm so sorry. I don't know why I gave in. It was so stupid. I deserved what I got." Colin stumbled to a stop as a fleeting expression of anger darted across Harry Potter's face, looking down in embarrassment. "You did not deserve the broken camera. I think you learned your lesson enough from everything else." Colin nodded, afraid to speak again. He heard the boy sigh and felt his cheeks heat. He focused on the stones in front of his feet, eyes tracing their edges over and over. When he heard movement, he looked up. The boy who lived was picking up his bag that he must have placed on the ground and slinging it casually over his shoulder. With another small smile, he turned and simply began to walk away. For a moment, Colin stood there, again struck dumb by the abrupt end to the conversation and his overwhelming relief to be freed from Harry Potter's presence. He began to smile, his fingers dropping to the camera on his chest, the smile turning to a beam as he, without thought, raised the camera to his eye, focusing on the form walking gracefully away from him. Without hesitation, he snapped a picture, and at the sound of the popping flash let out a whoop of joy. After a fruitless night of checking his traps and dodging dementors, Harry was ready to pummel something. Instead, he forced himself to sleep until noon and then rise to meet his friends in the great hall for lunch. He was brief and surly with Neville and silent as he ate. He was getting impatient, and despite the fact that he had only been at Hogwarts just over a week, was beginning to feel at a loss. He had thought perhaps that he would show up and Black would magically appear, saying, "Here I am," and Harry would capture him and do something with him, and then leave and go back to normal. Whatever normal was, he exited the hall and paused as Draco and Blaise both walked over. "We still meeting for practice, right?" Harry wanted to groan. He had forgotten. It was Saturday, and on Saturdays his friends had taken to meeting to study and help one another with spellwork. Reluctantly he nodded, and followed behind the others as they headed towards the staircases. When he entered the room last, he turned and laid his hand against the door, reaching out with his magic, even as he wished desperately to just return to his room and hide from the world. He let his awareness fall into the wood of the door, and with a quick mental picture of a privacy shield, warded the door. Satisfied, he withdrew his magic in a practiced motion, turning to collapse in the closest chair. His friends exchanged glances. They had seen him ward the door several times now, but still seemed surprised by it. Harry observed them, feeling as if a barrier existed between him and his friends. He wanted that easy camaraderie, wanted to joke and laugh. Instead, his mind was full of images of Black, of his desire for justice and retribution. Harry sat up, focusing his thoughts on the here and now. He sucked in a deep breath, expelling it in a single word. Hi. Hermione and Neville exchanged glances at the greeting, then smiled. Draco snorted. Hi back. Now what's the plan today? Because I feel a bit disappointed. Everything you've showed us so far is routine. Harry raised an eyebrow, smiling slightly. Routine, perhaps, but advanced nonetheless. Are you disappointed, Draco? Draco smirked, standing. I think we should duel. We're used to every week except these last two. I'd like to see what you are capable of, Harry. He almost flinched, but didn't. His friend really wanted to try and best him. Why? Folding his arms, he leant back, eyes narrowed. I don't think that's a good idea, not right now. Draco sniffed, his arrogant face falling into harsh lines. Are we not good enough for you, huh? Draco, stop it. Hermione spoke up, her eyes alight with anger. Just stop it. We're all sick of the way you have been baiting him. Enough's enough. I agree. Blaise echoed calmly after Hermione's forceful words. Draco, if anything, stiffened further before looking away. Before things could degenerate any more, Harry quickly spoke up. While he had no wish to duel his friends, he did have something else in mind. In one of my letters, I described the Patronus charm for battle against Dementors. Have you been able to master it? His friends exchanged glances before Neville spoke with a shrug. It took a while, but we've all managed to get a little missed, to varying degrees anyway. Nothing like what Hermione's book described. Blaise tried to get Professor Lupin to cast it in class, but he refused, said it was a private thing. Private? Harry echoed, frowning. The man had not denied him, and even offered help in casting it. Was it because the man's patronus was a wolf? Did he fear placing too many clues to the nature of his curse? Harry doubted the man would return for another year already, once wizarding children reported his strange sickness to their parents. Not unless the anti-werewolf laws were repealed. What had Dumbledore hoped to gain from employing a werewolf? It had to be linked to black somehow. His thoughts darkening, Harry stood. I'd like to help you all become proficient at it. Draco looked mutinous, but withdrew his wand with a sharp motion. Expecto Patronus. His wand movement was impeccable, Harry saw, and his magic responded eagerly. The mist spewed forth, swirling and thick, but Harry saw no answering connection from the boy's mind. Memory was not strong enough. Harry nodded and spoke. The problem is your memory. Everything else is perfect. The memory is the key to this spell, not just will or power. Hermione jabbed her wand forward, followed by Neville and Blaise. All three of them had the same problem, as it was obvious they had practiced hard to get both movement and wording correct. Harry stepped back, gestured that they all cast again. They did so seamlessly, and the room filled with silvery mist, a feeling of warmth and peace. Harry saw glimmers from their mind, echoes of sparse memory, but not the stream of light that had been present in Lupin. He stepped back again, tilting his head before speaking. Yes, the problem is definitely memory. Lupin told me there are two forms of a sort that a patronus can take. Wait, you talked with Professor Lupin about this. Harry raised his eyebrows at Blaise's angry face. Yes, why? Blaise frowned, crossing his arms. The man wouldn't even show me the curse, said it was too advanced. Why would he show you? Harry shrugged, though his eyes narrowed. Hermione told you of our conversation yesterday. They all nodded. Harry turned away, looking blankly out the window as his thoughts raced. I believe Lupin, along with Black, were friends of my parents. Perhaps he is trying to reach out a hand to me. If so, he is being pretty subtle about it. He has not mentioned them to me. Hermione nodded, then bit her lip. What were you saying about patronuses? His mind elsewhere, it took him a bit to get back on track. He sighed, absently touching the wand tied to his left wrist. Lupin said, perhaps not in so many words, that a patronus could either reflect yourself, the happiness present inside you, or it could reflect a person or soul that makes you happy. This is why a wizard's patronus form does not always reflect their animagus form. It can, of course, but you wouldn't know unless you were an animagus. Or perhaps the thought that makes you happy would tell you. Neville spoke up tentatively, eyeing Herman. The book didn't say you could have multiple patronus forms, but wouldn't that be possible if your happy memory changed, or if you went from thinking of others to thinking of yourself, for happiness? Harry tilted his head, considered. Hermione frowned and spoke. The books always said there was only one form. It's actually registered with the ministry if you successfully cast a corporeal one in front of a government official. They can be identified to an extent. Blaise spoke up, agreeing. That's right. It was a form of bragging among the Auras who had the best patroness form. My mother's second husband had the patroness form of an alligator, big giant teeth, always liked to show it off before he died. Blaze drifted off, flushed. Harry sighed and shrugged. I cannot really say, Neville. All evidence, I suppose, points to there being one, but perhaps no one has ever truly tried it. I've read of people who used to be able to cast patronesses losing that ability when their happiness is tarnished. Perhaps our magic imprints itself with the spell, learns to associate the first animal you cast with happiness in your mind. I don't know. Try again. Think of a purely happy thought, a memory. Again they cast, and again, the mist warming the room and almost making him feel light-headed. He found himself grinning, and when he asked them to cast a third time, Draco spun around, sneering. What are you grinning about? You think it's funny we can't cast it right? What about you? Haven't seen you trying yet. Harry rocked back on his heels slightly with the forcefulness of the verbal attack, surprised. He shook his head vehemently, eyes wide. No, I'm sorry, it's not that at all. It's just the mist. It's warm and peaceful, makes me feel relaxed. Draco gaped slightly, and Blaze chuckled beside him, giving the blonde a playful shove. Honestly, Draco, touchy. Draco closed his mouth and angled his chin upwards with a look of superiority. I'm just saying he hasn't cast his yet, and he's trying to teach us. Harry sighed, shaking his head. I can cast it, but did not want to. I was hoping to see all of yours first. Draco looked disbelieving, a look echoed by Blaze. Hermione frowned, but Neville seemed understanding. As if in support, the Gryffindor stepped forward, his face determined. Show us once, Harry. Maybe we need to see yours first in order to see what we are doing wrong. We don't even really know what to expect, other than what we read in the book. Harry reluctantly nodded and closed his eyes. He hated being different, hated feeling as if he was showing off. These were his friends. They knew how advanced he was, but a part of him wanted to hide still, wanted to be normal. He tried to turn his mind back to happy thoughts, searching inside for that same place he had found before, that inner core of peaceful content. Dread squirmed slightly, its magic reaching out to touch his own briefly, and with that touch, he saw the feathered serpent coiled upon his table in London, red crest raised, as it examined the old wizard in front of him with just as much curiosity as it itself was being watched. A Quetzalcoatl! How wonderful! Flamel's voice was warm and youthful, his green eyes bright with wonder. Haven't seen one of these for a century or so, when I visited the rain forests with Perenelle. Not a true one, you said. This is the ritual knife, sentient. Dread hissed, his tongue flickering out. Standing above him, Harry shrugged. He used to be a knife, so plain silver and steel, with gems for his two pairs of eyes. That's another thing, he was a two-headed snake. I can still transform him for a ritual, but it's not the same, hard to describe. Flamel nodded, reaching out a hand to gently caress the snake's soft side, a long, gentle touch. He is amazing, Harry. Harry felt the touch as if it were he himself, Dread's memory merging with his own, that hand that strokes, gently instead upon his own soft chest for Slytherin, a burst of love rising inside him. With that feeling still upon his chest, he opened his eyes, raising his left hand with fingers splayed in front of him, eyes slightly wild as he forgot the very room about him, seeking only to take his memory and make it real. Flame. His knew it wasn't the right word, a part of his mind trying to bring him back to the present, but the spell had him now, the words in his mind and magic already. Expecto patronum, the Latin twisting to English. I wait for you, my patron, my father. I await your protection. The mist streamed from his fingers like a beam of silver light, liquid and shining as the moon's reflection in rippled water. It began to form, the eyes gleaming first into his own, the wide maw yawning in a show of sharp strength, the lean muscles and stocky build stretching itself out, thick fur covered with dappled spots. The jaguar stood there, focused on him, the claws in its forepaws stretching in a subtle motion, the end of its thick tail twitching. A sound drew its attention, it turning even as Harry did, observing his friends from mysterious eyes as it stood, stalking toward them. Neville backed up a step, eyes wide and mouth open, and the patroness leaped playfully towards him in a single bound, flinging itself forward as the boy tripped and fell onto his back. The large cat landed, mouth opening in a feline laugh, and Harry found the sound was coming from himself, loud and full of joy. The patroness turned, its silver form beginning to return to him, and collapse around the edges into beads of mist. Harry held out his hand, longing with all his might to touch the creature in front of him, to touch the symbol of his memories made real. The cat's long whiskers tickled his palm with waves of warmth, and even as the form began to disperse into air, his smile grew wider, soaking in the warmth and peace and love that flowed forth in visible waves of light. When it was gone, Harry closed his eyes, the image of the cat imprinted in his mind. Inside him, dread shifted again, its voice sibilant. "I always did like the old wizard." Harry hissed in agreement before opening his eyes and turning back to meet his friend's gaze. He cleared his throat, unable to stop smiling, his voice light and full of energy. "Well, did that help?" Neville let out a soft sound, his eyes wide. "That did not help me at all. Merlin's beard." Blaise began to laugh, his voice high, while Hermione seemed at a complete loss, her mouth open but wordless. She shifted from foot to foot, before finally simply sitting, her wand dangling loosely from her hand. Beside her, Draco's eyes were narrowed in thought, his face expressionless. Harry began to chuckle again, unable to stop the emotions that flooded through him, not knowing how to control the feeling that was so foreign to him. Absolute happiness. Hermione spoke up finally, her voice soft. "I don't think I've ever seen you laugh like that, Harry. You're so happy. Is that how it feels for everyone?" "I just can't imagine." Harry's mind was beginning to clear from the silvery haze that had its hold on him, and he spoke, his eyes beginning to darken to their normal hue. "I do not think so." Number Professor Lupin smiled, but it was a normal smile, I think. "Honestly, I don't know." And he was okay with not knowing. He was okay with everything at that moment. Draco shook his head, his grey eyes focused in thought. "You did not use the appropriate incantation or your wand." Hermione stiffened, and Harry felt a fission of worry tingle up his spine. But he shook it off with a shrug, sending Hermione an apologetic glance. "I think everyone here is aware of my wandless abilities by this point. As for the incantation, well, I did use it, I think. Perhaps it was only in my mind, was it? Well, my memory is of Nicholas Flamel, and in a way he was my guardian. He understood me in a way no one ever had. He was accepting of me, all of me, and he knew what I was capable of doing, what I have done. Expecto patronum, it can be translated in several ways. It depends on the wizard and their connection to their magic and themselves, their thoughts and memories. The patroness itself is a protector, a spirit guardian made up of happiness and light to combat the darkness of the world. It is your patron, and in ancient times in Rome, your father was your patron. That's perhaps an archaic translation, but it rings true to me. That patroness was not me in any form. It was my mentor, my guardian, and for the short time we had, he was like a father to me. In my mind, his memory made real is the patroness now, and so to summon him I but need to speak his name with intent. His voice drifted off, thoughts tumbling upon themselves, conclusions being drawn even as he spoke. A sound brought his attention up, and he looked at his friends, seeing both the surprise and awe there. He shook his head, shrugging. "This may be no help to you. I am different, a fact I need to get used to. Magic does not work for me as it does for the average wizard it. Sometimes I think it is more pure, more natural. That doesn't make it easier, if anything. It's more difficult because there are no rules, no examples for me to follow. Nothing is fact anymore, nothing is set in stone," Harry sighed, and the last feelings of love and peace left him feeling empty and at a loss. He looked over at his friends, a sad smile coming to his face. "Forget about me. Try casting again." Resolutely he gestured, and one by one they formed a line, determination lighting their faces. He could see the questions they wanted to ask and looked away. He had given enough of himself that day, and his desire to be alone tripled. He forced himself to continue, to keep giving tips and advice, while inside annoyance grew at their inability. He would not allow them to see it. Hermione suddenly stepped forward sharply, her wand flicking as she called out in a loud voice. "Expecto patronum." The mist poured from her wand, and just as suddenly Harry could see the form, a shape inside the cloud, 2 eyes and a long body with a thick tail, webbed feet padding across the stone. Just as quickly it was gone, but Hermione dropped her hand with wide eyes, jumping up and down. "Did you see it? Did you guys see it?" She turned to them, eyes wide and shining, grabbing Blaise, who was nearest, into a happy hug. Slytherin stiffened, startled, But Hermione let him go as fast as she had grabbed him, her face bright with joy. It was amazing. I felt it, you know. I mean, it wasn't huge or anything, not like Harry's, but I felt something, a presence. Neville and Blaise congratulated her, the Slytherin looking awkward. Draco grumbled under his breath, lips pressed tightly together before he spoke. What was that, Hermione? A ferret? The Gryffindor turned to him, her eyes narrowed in sudden annoyance. It was not a ferret, Draco, it was an otter. The blonde shrugged, raising a single eyebrow, and he leaned against a nearby desk. What's the difference? Never saw you as the rodent type. Hermione's eyes flashed as she stood to her fullest height, stepping forward to jab him in the chest with one stiff finger. For your information, otters are not rodents. They are in the mustelidae family. Draco smirked, eyes almost twinkling. That's just a fancy way to say weasel. Looks like you are a weasel lover after all. Hermione almost shouted in fury, her wand tightening in her fingers. Despite himself, Harry found himself chuckling, a sound he quickly choked off as Hermione whirled, her angry eyes locking on his own. That is not funny. You better not be laughing. Behind her, Draco winked at Harry, and he couldn't hold back the laughter. Hermione huffed, but her anger folded reluctantly into a smile as Neville and Blaise both joined in. Neville nudged her, face open and happy. What did you do different, Hermione? The girl's eyes unfocused, turned inward as she thought. Well, I thought about what Harry said about patronum sometimes meaning father. I thought back to a time when I was really little, one of my earliest memories. My father took me to the zoo, just me and him. My mom was at work. It was a surprise. He always did things like that, unexpected little gestures, fun things. Well, at the zoo there was an exhibit of European otters, and they were so much fun, playful and energetic. They were my favorite animal there, but then this lady came up, an employee, I think. She said the otters were going extinct, that they were endangered, and that people were killing them with pollution. I started to cry, and my dad kneels down beside me and put his arm around me. He said, "We'll save the otters, Hermione, don't cry. They'll be all right." Hermione drifted off, a smile hinting the corners of her mouth. I was so happy, and I believed him. That very day we signed up for the conservation effort through the zoo, and every year we went to their fundraiser. He got me something with an otter on it for a long time afterwards, like a pendant or earrings or a stuffed animal. Once, it was a silver ring with 4 otters chasing each other's tails. I thought that, single-handedly, we were saving all the otters in the country. Her smile was bright, and Harry couldn't help but smile. Beside him, Draco mumbled under his breath. That's so sweet I think I'm getting nauseous. Harry found himself chuckling again, and was very glad Hermione hadn't heard it as she turned back to Neville to explain the way her magic had reacted. He looked at the blonde beside him, nudging him with an elbow as he murmured, "You like to get a rise out of her, don't you?" Draco turned to him, his aristocratic features portraying only calm neutrality. I don't know what you are talking about. But Harry could see that his eyes were full of mirth, and his smile widened. Master Harry Potter, sir, the elves in the kitchen have prepared lunch. He glanced up, grimaced. Sorry, Darby, I lost track of time again. The elf's eyes widened, his hands wringing together. You never must apologize, great sir. We elves understand busy business. Harry sighed and waved for the house elf to continue. Darby immediately snapped his fingers, and a large tray appeared filled to the brim with food. His frown grew, but he reluctantly moved his notes on runic algorithms to the side in a careful stack. Darby gently set the tray on the desk, then stepped back. Harry spoke quickly before the elf could disappear again. Darby, wait. The elf froze, his large ears perking with interest. Harry ran a hand through his messy hair, trying to clear his thoughts. Then he reached out to grab a piece of parchment, quickly jotting down a few words before handing it to Darby. Can you take this to Hermione? Tell her I'm sorry for missing the meal. Darby eagerly bowed, running a hand over his starched uniform as he straightened. Harry had noticed how proud the elf was of it, and wondered again about the odd rules that governed house elves. Eyebrows furrowed, he casually spoke. Are there any free elves? Darby froze, eyes impossibly getting wider. Sir. Harry sighed and waved his hand away. Never mind that, it was just a thought. I've never heard of a colony of elves, call it curiosity. The house elf bowed, but his face was conflicted. Finally he spoke, his voice high and nasal. Many an elf rather die than be free. Scary it is, and we has no purpose, must find own purpose. A scary, scary thing. But his voice was wistful. Harry frowned. So what purpose have free elves found? Darby looked up at him, his sallow skin taut over oblong bone. Is always thought they be gardeners, perhaps, garden elves outside and free, getting dirty instead of cleaning, sir, a noble goal. Harry raised an eyebrow and fought not to smile. So you don't really know either. Darby wilted, sniffing as his eyes filled. No, sir, I has not known. I probably still clean was I free, but for money, Harry grinned. And what would a free elf do with money? Darby perked up, eyes gleaming. Well, I would buy clothes, sir, mountains and mountains of clothes. Shirts and trousers and socks and sparkling banglers, layers and layers, of all colours and shapes. Harry pictured that mental image in his head and laughed. Darby smiled wide, eyes bright, then snapped his fingers with authority, swirling away with the slight haze of bent air. It was far past midnight when Harry felt his trap ward trigger. He had had them all tied into a stone he had tied about his neck, and with its activation, the magic would heat the stone against his skin. Immediately he rolled off his bed and flung on his outer robe, barely bothering with underclothes. Sliding his wand into the leather holster over his forearm, he hesitated a brief second in thought. It would take too long to sneak out of the castle on foot. He jumped through phoenix flame, his magic spreading about him, his eyes staring openly through the writhing whiteness as he lifted a hand to his neck to hold the small stone that contained the link spells for the trap ward. He reached out, feeling for the particular ward's location. He let himself out high above the trap, the sudden pull of gravity leaving him in a free fall, tumbling head over heels towards the ground, until he righted himself and released his wings, letting them billow behind him and catch the wind, jerking him to a sudden stop. The ground below was dark and rocky, a sheer cliffside not far from the castle, but on the opposite side of the forest. Too close for comfort, the Dementors hovered, black specks against the gloom of night. Inwardly he cursed, before his gaze went down to the ground again, searching. When he saw the ward and the struggling mass caught within, he began to descend in wide loops, trying to observe the situation. It looked like a mass of dark fur, growling and biting and scratching at the pentagram around its form. It was hard to make out details, but as he got closer, he could see a gleam of wild eyes and white teeth, snapping in challenge at the runes in one particular corner. It was intelligent, then. Harry's heart began to hammer in his chest, his fingers curling into fists. Soon he would have his wizard. He dived sharply, the wind tearing sound from around him, the roaring noise loud and incessant in his ears. The ward had been placed between two larger boulders in a long area of flat ground, perfect for catching a man walking carefully downhill. Harry landed with a loud thump that reverberated up his bones. Wings spread around him protectively, his eyes alight with fiery anger. The black form, a large dog he now saw, turned to face him, its mouth open in a snarl. Harry met its gaze and saw the grey eyes widen in sudden shock. Black, turn so I can see your traitorous face. Harry spoke low, holding himself still, though everything inside wanted to attack, wanted to rentier strike. The dog sat, its jaws clamped shut as it observed him. Harry saw how thin it was, how the fur hung down on its frame, the ribs that showed beneath the skin. He wanted to break those ribs, wanted to rip the fur out and drain the blood from its body, wanted to avenge a crime he did not remember but that tore out the heart of him with the lost possibilities. A true father and mother, a happy family, a betrayal. He might not have remembered them, but they had been his. They should have been his. When the dog gave no sign of compliance, Harry took another slow step forward, standing at the edge of the runic ward, one designed to entrap and hold. Rock was strewn about and dug up in furious digging, but the runes themselves remained untouched on anchored stone. Harry had been careful and allowed no mistakes. The design worked not merely above ground, but extended underneath in a true dome. Serious black. Harry growled, and the dog's tongue slid from its mouth as it cocked its head in amusement, and the fury inside him rose to rage. He stepped inside the ward, his magic settling above his skin with crackling energy, his eyes gleaming green in the night. The dog stood, its head reaching to his chest, its posture shifting. Harry waited for the attack, anticipation rising in him, waited for the dog to try to hurt him so he could hurt it in return. It just stood, head lowered, tail upright. His fists clenched, began to shake. Change now. I know you are an animagus. Let me see your face. Still the black form was immobile, except for the flickering of its grey eyes, full of emotion. Harry wanted to howl, wanted to step forward and beat the mongrel, wanted to hurt as he was hurting. With a sudden mental wrench, Harry threw himself into those eyes, his mind ramming against the wizard's own, its thoughts suddenly clear in emotion-tinged syllables that were not words, but somehow were. A wizard's mind in a dog's brain, synapses firing at timed intervals. Tilda love, son of my brother, hate, Grafe, a dark night filled with stars, the movement of the world beneath his paws, the traitor, the rat, the traitor. Hogwarts, kill, kill, kill. A scream brought him back, though whether it was his own or the gaunt man kneeling before him, Harry could not tell, his mind rocking in nauseous turmoil. With a wrench, Harry turned to the side, his late dinner coming up in heaves. The pure chaos in that mind, the man was mad. Insane. Harry kept his eyes on the man, backing up. Sirius Black sprawled before him, sucking in deep breaths through battered lungs. His skin was covered in bruises in various process of healing, his form thin and sickly pale. How long had the man stayed in his animagus form? What was that feeling? Harry shook his head, swaying, sweat slicking his skin. He couldn't quite get his mind around what he had seen within that mind, couldn't understand it. Black's eyes cracked open, and Harry did not think, kneeling beside him and reaching out, holding the filthy head still and looking deep into his grey eyes. "Harry, don't, please." The whisper was faint, and he ignored it, bracing himself for the clash, but prepared to go deeper, his fingers tightening and easily holding the weak man still as he tried to struggle. Gathered himself and ripped into the murderer's eyes, clawed his way through the immediate pain and agony and going underneath, looking up through another pair of eyes, tall and strong and full of mad grief. A baby black-haired with brilliant green eyes. It was burning. "He's my darling, my little pronkslet." A man, brown hair messy about his face. They were inside. "James, we are not dear." The voice, a woman's, her eyes kind and a smile lighting her face. He felt a lurch of love, of regret, and turned away. Why? The house was burning. They were inside. They were inside, and it was burning. He flung the open door away from him, ignored the stinging pain. Nothing mattered. They were inside. He had to get to them. When he came upon the brown-haired man, sprawled and sliced to pieces inside, the grief began, a torrent of pain and anguish and fear, and he jumped the body, never pausing, because he was an auror and he knew death. He knew its many flavors. He knew the eyes always died first. "We've got to go under, Sirius. Dumbledore has a plan. It's that damned prophecy. We don't believe a whit of it, of course, but you know him. He won't let a single possibility go. We are targets now." He took the stairs 3 at a time, his long legs propelling him up the stairs. Around him the fire crackled and roared, pictures falling in sprays of glass, smoke thick and dark. He reached the room and saw the hair first, long and red and beautiful. "They'll think it's you, Padfoot. We can't trust Moony. I want to, but..." "It's not him, it's that curse. And you know how it is with werewolves. An alpha, a true one like Fenrir, comes along and who knows what might happen." She was laid almost gently, gingerly on her side as if placed by a loving hand. He couldn't comprehend it. His mind refused to see how her eyes were closed and her hands crossed about her chest. Heard a noise, a shuffling, whimpering sound, and turned. His eyes caught on a long, thin wand lying on the floor on top of smoldering black robes. Robes, he knew, trimmed in silver and sewn with black obsidian stones of power. "It makes sense for it to be him. Don't look at me that way." He gathered the boy in his arms, holding him tight beneath his robes, leaving the house and holding the impossible, a survivor. But his mind couldn't focus on that. It was full of fury, love, grief, hate, hate, hate. The giant man was there, the large groundskeeper, and he pushed the child into his arms, the beautiful, impossible, lovely child with green eyes. And he hesitated, looking into the teary emeralds, and thought about staying, and telling Dumbledore and the wand upstairs that it looked like. But it was impossible, and he was out there, he was there, he did this, it was all his fault. "Peter," he howled. Another man, brown-haired and short, turned with wand clasped in his hand and eyes wide in fear. Around them muggles milled, broad daylight illuminating specks of dust, a crowd, a street. But it didn't matter, none of it did, because they were dead, they were all dead, and it was all his fault. "Peter, how could you?" he called out in a hoarse tone, and the man flinched, his eyes blinking too fast, his knuckles white. "Sirius, you can't understand, you couldn't." He is so powerful, so persuasive. I had to, it was me or them, I would have died. The fury rose in waves, burning his insides, trembling through his hands as his wand wavered. He shouted back, not caring about the observing eyes of those stopped and staring around him, not caring about anything but the betrayal and grief and righteous anger. Then you should have died. I would have died for them. The short man's eyes widened, and Sirius stepped forward, pushing a muggle out of his way, desperate, so desperate to get to this man, to reach his hands out and squeeze, to tear him limb from limb from limb, to spill his rat's brain out onto the pavement in a glorious well of brown and red and white. The wave of heat and light lifted him off his feet, flung him back into other warm bodies, and when the smoke cleared he saw it, the finger, as if a bullseye in a target, and as the red robes began to appear, began to catalogue and criticize, he threw back his head and howled in furious laughter at the joke fate played on fools. Harry drew back, gasping, tears running down his cheeks. He felt himself fall back, fall off the man underneath him who was trembling and laughing, his voice loud and mad. And underneath the laughter was grief and love to such measure Harry felt his breath hitch, felt his mind unable to comprehend the stress that had driven such emotion into insanity, and he did not want to understand it, because it was a path that he would not choose to take. He couldn't comprehend what he had saw, couldn't think. He felt a sudden wave of depression so great it would have brought him to his knees, if he was not already on the ground. The man beside him suddenly groaned, turning over and scrabbling at the dirt with his broken nails, his voice low and desperate. "No, no, please, not them, not again, I didn't do it. But it's all my fault, I let them do it, I let them die." And Harry suddenly knew, his head tilting back to see them, coming in droves of black-robed figures, their hoods dark. The Dementors must have sensed black as soon as he had been forced back into his wizard form, the strong emotions only serving to make his presence greater in their dark minds. He made himself stand under the crushing weight of sadness, ignoring the cries beside him, looking up at what seemed to be hundreds of the soul-sucking fiends, gathering closer and closer, skeletal arms reaching out in a macabre parody of an embrace, wanting to gather him up, pull him close, and in the back of his mind, he heard a high-pitched scream, a woman's scream. Harry. On his forehead, Mem seemed to burst into flame, burning, his runes alit with fire, a pain that anchored him to the present, that allowed him to pull out his wand in his left hand. His defensive position, holding the wood up into the face of the Dementors crowding close, their breaths deep and snuffling, scenting the air for their souls. He made his mind focus, made him remember himself, standing in his living room, looking into Nicholas Flamel's face as he smiled, his frail hand on his shoulder. Look forward to seeing what waits on the other side. He looked up, looked into green eyes set deep in a wrinkled face. "I will miss you, sir." Flamel smiled, pulled him into a hug, and Harry felt his heart lurch with a mix of love and sadness. Above him, his mentor spoke. "I'll always be here, Harry, inside of you." His eyes cleared, the darkness pressing in on all sides, helpless crying sounding out behind him, and Harry looked up into that deep shadow and cried out, "Expecto Patronum." "I'm waiting, sir. I'm waiting for you." The silver flooded out in long loops of memory, full of laughter and tears and curses, a mix of life's ebb and flow, a direct contrast to the darkness that wanted to stop all such movement and to send the world to stillness. The jaguar was larger than he had ever seen it, its spotted fur bristling with fury as it leapt upon the Dementors, scattering them with each swipe of its paws, its maw opening in a feline scream. The creature shrieked, loud and piercing, and Harry suddenly heard another sound, loud voices filled with concern. With his cat, another Patronus suddenly appeared, a bright wolf of light, sinking its teeth into the form of a Dementor. Harry's eyes widened and he turned, grabbing the supine form of Sirius Black. He shook the man quickly, ears attuned to the voices drawing nearer. "Where, Black? Where were you hiding, quickly?" Black's eyes looked up into his own dimly. His wan face was more sunken in than ever, the Dementor's presence driving back what strength he possessed. "James!" Harry groaned, dropping the man to stand up, peering at the sky. He could almost make it out, 3 figures on brooms, flying fast. With another curse, Harry whirled, reaching down to lift Black up, awkwardly holding the wizard as he focused. With a flash of fire, they were gone, the rune stones around them blackened and cracked. tilde asterisk tilde, to be continued. Confrontations of many kinds, tilde asterisk tilde, tilde, review please.